Hello, my friends. I hope you're all doing well. Before we begin, I have a small favor to ask. Ranger Screams is going through a difficult time right now, and we truly need your support. Our goal is to reach 1,000 likes and 1,000 comments on this video. If everyone watching leaves a like and writes a comment, we can absolutely make it happen together. It would make a huge difference and help the channel more than you know. Thank you so much for your support. Now get comfortable, and let's begin. Search and rescue missions are never exactly easy. They can prove to be incredibly emotionally and physically difficult at times, along with managing a team and making sure everybody is die-hard and on the same page as you. And managing a team can be even more difficult. Not only is it incredibly strenuous, but it also drains resources, time, and everyone's emotional energy. This search and rescue mission had been no different when we had come across an abandoned campsite. There were 7 campers in total who had been now reported missing. And this was right in the middle of a national park that is known to have extremely dangerous weather patterns. And even lately, even more so with the unpredictable weather. There had been a storm brewing coming in from the west when we began working our way higher up ground. The call had come in at 3:17 a.m. I remember because I'd just managed to fall asleep after a 20-hour shift the day before. My phone vibrated on the nightstand, illuminating the darkened bedroom with its harsh blue light. My wife, Caroline, stirred beside me but didn't wake. She'd grown accustomed to these late-night interruptions over our 12 years of marriage. "Mitchell," I answered, my voice thick with sleep. "John, it's Pete. We've got a situation at Blackwood Ridge." Pete Danvers was the park's lead ranger, and he never called unless it was serious. I swung my legs over the side of the bed, already reaching for my clothes. "How many?" "7. Group of friends on a weekend camping trip. Should have checked in with the ranger station yesterday afternoon. Never showed." I rubbed my eyes, processing the information. "Weather status? Not good. Storm system moving in from the west. Weather service is predicting heavy snowfall by tomorrow afternoon. Temperatures already dropping." "Shit," I muttered. Blackwood National Park was unforgiving on the best of days. With a storm coming in, we'd be racing against more than just time. Any comms from them at all? Nothing since they registered their campsite location 3 days ago. Last known position was near Crater Lake, about 7 miles in from the east entrance. "I'll assemble the team. Meet at base in 40. "Copy that." I ended the call and finished dressing in silence, my mind already mapping out the search grid, calculating resources, and assembling the team roster. As search and rescue coordinator for Blackwood County, I'd overseen hundreds of operations over the past 15 years, some successful, others less so. The mountains didn't give up their victims easily. Caroline's voice came from the darkness. "Be careful out there, John." I leaned down and kissed her forehead. "Always am. Go back to sleep. Bring them home," she whispered as I headed for the door. "I'll try," I answered. The same exchange we'd had countless times before. The drive to the SAR headquarters took 20 minutes along empty pre-dawn roads. The temperature gauge in my truck showed 28 FF, and I could see my breath inside the cab until the heater finally kicked in. By the time I pulled into the lot, several vehicles were already there. The core team members responding to my text alert. Inside, the operations room buzzed with quiet efficiency as my team prepared. Maps were being unfurled, equipment checked, and communication protocols established. Melissa Chen, my second-in-command and best tracker, looked up as I entered. 7 missing near Crater Lake," she said. Not a question, but a confirmation. I nodded, shrugging off my jacket. "Pete's bringing the details. Storm system moving in fast. Timer's already running," she replied, tapping her watch. The unspoken reality hung in the air between us. In these temperatures, with a storm approaching, the missing hikers had perhaps 48 hours before hypothermia claimed them. And that was assuming they were uninjured and properly equipped. Pete arrived 10 minutes later with the missing persons information. The 7 hikers were friends from college: Jason Mercer, 31, Eliza Carpenter, 30, Daniel and Sophia Rodriguez, both 32, Trevor Winters, 33, Alyssa Newman, 29, and Kyle Braddock, 31. All were experienced outdoors people with several previous trips to Blackwood under their belts. "Last communication?" I asked, studying their registration forms. "Jason texted his girlfriend 3 days ago," Pete said, sliding his phone across to me. "Said they'd made camp and were going to explore some caves they'd found nearby." I read the message. "Made it to the spot. Found some cool caves not on any maps. Going to check them out tomorrow. Service spotty, but we'll call when back in range. Love you." "Caves?" I looked up at Pete. "There aren't any major cave systems in that sector." Pete shrugged. "Nothing in our official records, but you know how Blackwood is. The geology's always shifting, especially with all the seismic activity lately." He wasn't wrong. The park sat along a minor fault line, and we'd recorded increased tremor activity over the past year. Nothing major, but enough to potentially open new sinkholes or cave entrances. By 5 a.m., we had assembled our full team, 12 searchers, 4 handlers with search dogs, a medic, and a communications specialist. The morning briefing was quick and to the point. We'd deploy in 3 teams, covering the area in a systematic grid pattern, starting from the hikers' last known location. Remember, I told them, the clock is ticking and Mother Nature isn't on our side. Stay in radio contact, check in every 30 minutes, and if you find anything at all, report it immediately. These people are counting on us. We loaded into the Park Service vehicles and headed out as the first hints of dawn crept over the eastern ridge. The forecast had worsened overnight. The storm was now expected to hit by nightfall rather than the following afternoon. Every minute counted. The drive to the east entrance took an hour, and another 2 hours of hiking brought us to the coordinates of the registered campsite. The rising sun did little to warm the air, which felt brittle with cold. My breath formed thick clouds with each exhale, and the trees around us creaked and groaned under the weight of ice that had formed during the night. "Spread out," I ordered as we approached the clearing. "Standard search pattern. Document everything." The campsite appeared as an eerie tableau when we entered the small clearing. 3 tents stood in a semicircle around a long dead fire pit. A cooking station had been set up on a flat rock, with pots and utensils neatly arranged. Backpacks rested against tree trunks, and hiking boots were paired outside tent entrances. It looked as though the campers had stepped away momentarily and would return at any second, except they wouldn't. I'd seen enough abandoned sites to recognize the stillness of a place where something had gone wrong. "No signs of wildlife disturbance," Melissa noted, crouching to examine the ground. "No drag marks, no blood. Tents are all zipped up," called Ryan, one of our newer team members. "Sleeping bags inside. Personal items untouched." I moved to the center of the site, turning slowly to take it all in. "Check the packs. Look for their phones, emergency equipment." The team methodically went through the campsite, documenting and cataloging. All 7 backpacks were accounted for, containing personal items, extra clothing, and emergency supplies. 6 phones were found powered off in the tents, presumably to conserve battery in an area with little to no service. "1 phone missing," reported Melissa. "Based on the personal items, it's probably Jason Mercer's." I nodded, processing this information. "So they all left their gear, their shelter, most of their phones, and disappeared without signs of struggle." "Looks that way," Melissa agreed. "Either they intended to return quickly, or..." She didn't finish the thought. She didn't need to. In our line of work, unfinished scenarios rarely had happy endings. "What about those caves Jason mentioned?" asked Pete, who had joined our team for the search. I pulled out my topographical map of the area. Nothing marked within a 3-mile radius. "But if they found something new, the dogs might be able to pick up a trail," suggested Carlos, our lead canine handler. His German Shepherd, Rusty, was already circling the perimeter of the campsite, nose to the ground. "Get them working," I agreed. "The rest of you, continue processing the site. I want to know everything about these people and what might have happened here." For the next hour, we documented every detail of the abandoned campsite, while the dog teams worked to establish a scent trail. The scene became increasingly puzzling the more we examined it. Food had been prepared but not eaten. Journal entries stopped mid-sentence. A camera contained photos from the first day and a half of their trip, showing smiling faces against scenic backdrops, but nothing that indicated distress or danger. The last photo showed Jason pointing excitedly towards something off-camera. Time-stamped 2:17 p.m. 2 days earlier. The image was slightly blurred, but his expression was clear, a mixture of wonder and surprise. "John," Carlos's voice crackled over the radio. "Dogs have something. About 200 yards northeast of your position." I keyed my radio. "On my way." As I made my way through the dense forest, following the sound of excited barking, a sense of unease settled in my stomach. 15 years of search and rescue had given me a sixth sense for when something wasn't right, and something about this case felt fundamentally wrong from the start. Little did I know how deep that wrongness went, or how it would haunt me in the months and years to come. Looking for any signs or traces of life. There is no cell service here, so if one were to be injured or lost, it's basically impossible to contact anybody unless you can manage to climb to higher ground. And even then, getting an approximate location is not always guaranteed. We came across this campsite fairly early on in our search, but decided to hold off on exploring it further until we had finished the initial area scouring the perimeter for any real signs of life. However, after several hours of searching and not finding anyone, our dogs seemed to catch a scent trail. Bingo. This was the meal ticket we needed to find these campers. We began following the dogs in the direction they pulled us. About 600 yards down a small hill in the forest, we all got hit with this terrible odor. When I reached Carlos and the dogs, the rest of the team was already converging on the location. Rusty and the other 3 search dogs were all agitated, pulling hard against their leads and whining, behavior I'd rarely seen from these well-trained animals. "What have we got?" I asked, slightly winded from jogging through the dense undergrowth. Carlos frowned, restraining Rusty with visible effort. Dogs picked up a strong scent trail heading northeast from the camp. All 4 of them hit on it simultaneously. "But," I prompted, sensing his hesitation, "but they're acting strange, John. Not their usual tracking behavior. More like they're afraid of something." I surveyed the area, seeing nothing immediately unusual, just the same snow-dusted forest that surrounded us for miles. "Let's follow it, carefully." We formed a line and began tracking the scent trail, following the dog's lead. The terrain sloped gradually downward, taking us into a shallow valley I recognized from the topographical maps. According to our charts, this area consisted of loose shale and limestone deposits, not unusual for this part of the park. After about 400 yards, I noticed the first odd detail: a single hiking boot, adult-sized, lying on its side beneath a pine tree. Melissa bagged it as evidence while I photographed its position. "Matches the description of the boots the hikers were wearing," she confirmed. Another 100 yards further, we found a flashlight, still switched on but with batteries nearly depleted, its beam barely visible in the daylight. Then a water bottle, a hat, small personal items scattered along an increasingly clear trail through the underbrush, as though the hikers had been shedding possessions as they moved. "It's like a breadcrumb trail," muttered Ryan. "Or like they were in a hurry," Melissa countered, "dropping things as they ran." "From what?" Pete asked the question no one wanted to voice. Before anyone could speculate, the wind shifted, and that's when it hit us. A stench so powerful and revolting that several team members immediately gagged or covered their faces. It was death mixed with rotting flesh. It all made us instantaneously nauseous, and judging by the fresh footprints in the snow leading up to the site, it meant that somebody was here, but nobody could survive being out here for this long. Not with the storm coming. "What the hell is that?" gasped Ryan, his face pale beneath his winter tan. I'd encountered the smell of death many times in my career, from decomposing bodies lost in the wilderness to animal carcasses rotting in summer heat. This was different, more intense. Wrong somehow. "Masks on," I ordered, pulling my own emergency mask from my pack. It wouldn't completely block the odor, but it might make it bearable enough to continue. The dogs were now in a state of near panic, whining and trying to pull away from the smell, rather than toward it. Carlos and the other handlers had to struggle to maintain control. "Should we send the dogs back?" Carlos asked, his voice muffled through his mask. I considered our options. The dogs were our best tracking tool, but their behavior suggested we were approaching something they found deeply threatening. "Secure them here," I decided. "We'll continue on foot. 2 handlers stay with the dogs, 2 come with us." We proceeded more cautiously now, following the trampled path through the snow. The stench grew stronger with each step, becoming almost physically painful in its intensity. Even through the masks, it burned our nostrils and made our eyes water. After going a little further, we could see what appeared to be a large hole in the ground. This is exactly where the dogs were leading us to. We inspected further. The hole was roughly circular, approximately 30 feet in diameter, with edges that appeared to have collapsed inward. Fresh soil and broken limestone were scattered around the perimeter, suggesting this was a recent formation. Standing at the edge, I could see it dropped straight down for about 40 feet before opening into what looked like a larger underground space. "This isn't on any of our maps," Pete said, consulting his GPS. "Must be a new sinkhole, formed within the last week. Based on the fresh edges," Melissa added, kneeling to examine the rim. "Probably triggered by those tremors we felt last Tuesday." I shone my high-powered flashlight into the darkness below. The beam cut through the gloom, revealing a stone floor littered with debris from the collapse, and something else. Something that made my blood run cold. "Bodies," I said quietly. "I count 5, no, 7 forms down there." The team fell silent, the only sound the whimpering of the dogs in the distance and the whistle of the wind through the trees. "We need to get down there," I said finally. "Melissa, Pete, you're with me. The rest of you, secure a perimeter and set up the retrieval equipment. Radio base camp and update them on our situation." We could tell by approaching this hole that the ground had actually caved in right here, probably from the sheer weight of snow and ice. As we approached this opening and we looked down, we found all 7 hikers. All of them had fallen to their death roughly 40 feet below. But in this weather, as cold as it was, and having them only been missing for the short amount of time, there's still no reason why that horrible odor of death and rotting flesh was as strong as it was, and we can never trace that smell because the smell was not coming from the small cave in the ground. It was coming from all around us, like we had walked in this thick cloud that enveloped us. We rigged our rappelling gear quickly, with the efficiency that comes from years of practice. Before descending, I radioed the base camp with our coordinates and situation report. The response was broken by static, but they confirmed that additional personnel and body retrieval equipment were being dispatched to our location. "Be careful down there," the base camp operator warned. "That storm's accelerating. ETA now less than 6 hours." "Copy that," I replied. "We'll be quick." I went down first, the rope sliding through my gloved hands as I controlled my descent into the darkness. The smell grew even more intense as I dropped into the hole, a miasma that seemed to cling to my clothing and skin. At the bottom, I unclipped from the line and switched on my headlamp to supplement my flashlight. The sight that greeted me confirmed our worst fears. 7 bodies lay scattered across the stone floor, positioned as though they had fallen or been placed there. But something was immediately, disturbingly wrong. There was no blood, no visible trauma consistent with a 40-foot fall. The bodies weren't in the broken, twisted positions I would expect from impact victims. They lay almost peacefully, some on their backs, others curled on their sides as though sleeping. "Clear," I called up to Melissa and Pete, who began their own descents. While waiting for them, I conducted an initial assessment, being careful not to disturb the scene more than necessary. The victims wore hiking clothes appropriate for the weather, thermal layers, water-resistant pants, heavy jackets. Their boots were laced, their clothing intact and undamaged. I recognized them from the photos we'd reviewed. Jason, Eliza, the Rodriguez couple, Trevor, Alyssa, and Kyle. The hole opened into a larger chamber, roughly 50 feet across, with smooth limestone walls that disappeared into darkness beyond my light's reach. The ground was dry despite the snow above, and surprisingly warm compared to the freezing air at the surface. Melissa reached the bottom and immediately began documenting the scene with her camera. Pete followed moments later, his expression grim behind his mask. "This makes no sense," he said, voice hushed despite the fact that we were the only living souls present. "If the ground collapsed while they were standing on it, they should be more broken," Melissa finished bluntly. "Impact injuries, trauma," I nodded, kneeling beside the nearest body. Alyssa, according to her features matching the photo we had. No visible injuries consistent with a fall, no defensive wounds, no signs of struggle. "So they were dead before they ended up down here?" Pete suggested. "Or they didn't fall," Melissa countered. "They could have been placed here." "By whom?" Pete asked. "And why wouldn't the same person take their equipment, their phones, their valuables?" I moved to examine Jason's body, noting that his right hand was loosely curled around something. Carefully, using a gloved finger, I opened his stiffened fingers. Inside was a phone, presumably the missing device from camp, and a small, smooth stone with odd markings etched into its surface. The phone screen was cracked, but when I pressed the power button, it flickered to life, showing a battery at 2%. "Got a phone," I announced. "Might give us some answers." As I secured the phone in an evidence bag, Melissa called from the other side of the chamber. "John, you need to see this." I crossed to where she stood, illuminating the wall with her light. Carved or etched into the smooth limestone were symbols, dozens of them, arranged in patterns that reminded me of constellations or circuit diagrams. They seemed to have been there for years, perhaps centuries, the edges worn smooth by time. "What the hell?" Pete whispered, reaching out as if to touch them before thinking better of it. "Carvings like these have been found in other cave systems in the region," Melissa said. "Usually attributed to indigenous populations from several thousand years ago." "Usually," I echoed, unconvinced. Something about the symbols seemed wrong. Too precise, too mathematical for ancient carvings. As I turned to examine more of the chamber, my light caught something on Alyssa's face that I hadn't noticed before. Moving closer, I directed my beam at her cheek and felt my stomach clench. As these bodies were retrieved, they all had something very disturbing. They all had this strange mark burned into the left side of their cheek. Every single one of them. It was almost like looking at a brand of some kind. Like they had been branded. "Check the others," I ordered, my voice sharper than intended. Pete and Melissa moved quickly from body to body, confirming what I already suspected. Each victim bore the same mark, a circular pattern with lines radiating outward, like a stylized sun or star. The marks were identical in size and placement, precisely centered on the left cheek of each victim. "What could have done this?" Pete asked, his voice unsteady. "It's a burn," Melissa determined, examining Trevor's mark closely. "Second degree, I'd guess. Clean edges, consistent depth, a brand," I concluded, the word tasting foul in my mouth. They were branded, all of them, identically. The implications were horrifying. This wasn't a tragic accident. It wasn't a group of hikers stumbling into a sinkhole. This was something deliberate, something ritualistic. "We need to get them out of here," I said, my training taking over where rational thought faltered. "Document everything, then prepare for extraction. Let's move." As we worked, I tried to process what we were seeing. The bodies showed no obvious cause of death. No injuries, no signs of violence beyond the brands. They were simply dead. And the smell, that overwhelming stench of decay that seemed to permeate everything, made no sense given the condition of the bodies and the cold temperature, which should have slowed decomposition. It took nearly 2 hours to properly document the scene and prepare the bodies for extraction. By then, additional personnel had arrived at the surface, and we began the grim process of lifting each victim from their underground tomb. As the last body, Daniel Rodriguez, was secured and began its ascent, I made a final sweep of the chamber, ensuring we hadn't missed anything. My light caught a dark opening in the far wall, a passage leading deeper into the earth. Curiosity and professional thoroughness compelled me to investigate. The tunnel was narrow but navigable, descending at a gentle slope. After about 20 feet, it opened into another, smaller chamber. My light revealed more symbols carved into these walls, similar to those in the main chamber but arranged differently. And in the center of the room stood a stone pedestal, roughly waist-high, with a shallow depression carved into its top. The depression was empty, but a fine dust or residue lined it, glinting slightly in my light. I photographed it carefully from multiple angles, then took a sample using an evidence bag from my kit. As I turned to leave, something caught my eye. A small object half buried in the dirt floor. I crouched and carefully excavated it, a metal cylinder, approximately 6 inches long and half an inch in diameter. It was surprisingly heavy for its size and had no visible seams or markings. I bagged this as well, then made my way back to the main chamber. Melissa was waiting for me at the bottom of the rope. "Find something?" she asked, noting the additional evidence bags. "Maybe," I replied. "There's another chamber back there. More symbols. And this." I showed her the metal cylinder. She frowned, examining it through the clear plastic. "Doesn't look like any camping gear I've seen." "Me neither. Let's get it to the lab." We were the last to ascend, emerging into a world transformed. The wind had picked up significantly during our time underground, driving needle-sharp snowflakes horizontally through the air. The temperature had dropped at least 10 degrees, and dark clouds boiled overhead. "Storm's coming in fast," Pete greeted us, shouting to be heard over the wind. "We need to move." The bodies had been secured in evacuation bags and were being prepared for transport. Given the deteriorating conditions, we would be using helicopter extraction rather than trying to carry them overland back to the trailhead. I checked my watch, 3:47 p.m. Daylight was already fading, and the storm would make visibility worse. The extraction point was a meadow about a mile southeast of our position, the closest suitable landing zone for the helicopters. "Move out," I ordered, and our grim procession began to make its way through the increasingly hostile forest. The journey that should have taken 30 minutes stretched to over an hour as conditions worsened. By the time we reached the meadow, visibility had dropped to less than 50 feet, and the howling wind threatened to knock us off our feet. The meadow itself was barely recognizable, already covered in several inches of fresh snow, whipped into drifts by the gale. I radioed the approaching helicopters, who confirmed they could still attempt the extraction but warned it would be their last window before the storm made flying impossible. The next 40 minutes were a blur of activity, as the helicopters arrived one after another, hovering just long enough to load the bodies and essential personnel before fighting their way back into the turbulent sky. The last chopper would take Melissa, Pete, and me, along with the evidence we'd collected. As we waited for its return huddled against the driving snow, Pete voiced the question that had been hanging between us unspoken. "What happened to those people, John?" I had no answer that made any sense. After 15 years of search and rescue, I'd seen death in almost every form the wilderness could deliver. Exposure, falls, animal attacks, drowning, but nothing like this. "I don't know," I admitted, "but we'll find out." The distant thump of rotor blades announced our ride's approach, barely audible over the screaming wind. As we prepared to board, I took one last look back toward the forest that concealed the sinkhole. Through the curtain of snow, I could have sworn I saw a figure standing at the tree line, tall, unnaturally still, watching us. I blinked, and it was gone, if it had ever been there at all. Just another trick of the storm and my overtaxed mind. But as the helicopter lifted us away from that cursed meadow, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were being allowed to leave, that whatever had claimed those 7 lives had decided, for now, that it didn't want ours. And upon further inspection of their corpses, neither of them had actually died from impact of falling. In fact, the medical examiner could not find a sign of death. It's as if they had just dropped dead. There was no outward physical signs of death or damage to the body. No fractured bones, no torn flesh, but yet none of it made sense. Somehow there was this cave in the ground that spanned roughly 30 feet in diameter and dropped to about 40 feet below, in a rocky alcove, and past the alcove it dropped even deeper. So deep you could not even see because it was dark. Why were they all down here together? Did somebody dump them down here? That's how it was starting to look. The helicopter ride back to Blackwood Memorial Hospital was turbulent and tense. Melissa sat beside me, reviewing the photos on her camera, while Pete stared silently out the window at the storm-lashed landscape below. None of us spoke. The roar of the engines made conversation difficult, but more than that, I think we were all processing what we'd seen, trying to fit it into frameworks that made sense and finding no way to do so. I clutched the evidence bags containing the phone, the strange stone, the metal cylinder, and the residue sample from the pedestal. Whatever answers existed, I hoped they might be found in these items. We landed at the hospital helipad at 6:23 p.m., by which time the storm had engulfed the entire region. The medical examiner, Dr. Eleanor Patel, met us as we disembarked, her face grave beneath the hood of her parka. "The bodies?" she asked without preamble. "Already inside," I confirmed. "All 7. She nodded once. "I've cleared my schedule. We start immediately. I want to observe," I told her. Not a request, but a statement. Her eyes met mine, and I saw understanding there. Like me, Dr. Patel had spent her career in this remote county, dealing with the unique challenges it presented. We'd worked together on countless cases over the years. "Of course," she said. "But clean up first. You smell like—" She didn't finish, but she didn't need to. Despite our decontamination procedures before boarding the helicopter, the stench from the sinkhole still clung to us, to our clothes, our gear, our skin. After showering and changing into clean clothes from my emergency locker, I made my way to the morgue in the hospital's basement level. Melissa had volunteered to log our evidence with the county sheriff's department, and Pete had returned to the Park Service offices to file his initial report. The morgue was brightly lit and clinically cold, stainless steel and tile designed for functionality rather than comfort. Dr. Patel was already at work, her assistant helping her arrange the 7 bodies on examination tables. "John," she greeted me, looking up from her preliminary notes. "Ready to begin?" I nodded, taking a position where I could observe without interfering. Dr. Patel was methodical and thorough, starting with external examinations of each victim. She documented the strange brand marks in particular detail, photographing and measuring each one. "These were inflicted ante-mortem," she noted, examining Jason Mercer's cheek under magnification. "There's vital reaction in the surrounding tissue. I'd estimate they were made between 12 and 24 hours before death." "They're identical," I observed. "Placement, size, pattern, yes," she agreed. "Remarkably consistent. This wasn't done by hand. Some kind of tool or device was used, something that could maintain perfect precision across multiple applications." As the examination continued, Dr. Patel's frown deepened. Each body told the same puzzling story. No external trauma beyond the brands, no signs of struggle, no indications of environmental exposure despite being found in a subterranean chamber. "Let's move to internal examination," she decided, preparing her instruments for the first autopsy. I won't detail the procedures that followed. I've witnessed many autopsies in my career, but these were different. Increasingly frustrating as Dr. Patel found nothing that explained how these 7 healthy adults had died. No water in the lungs to suggest drowning. No signs of cardiac failure. No evidence of toxins, though blood samples would be sent for detailed screening. Brain and organ tissues appeared normal. No internal bleeding or trauma. It was as if they had simply stopped living. "This makes no sense," Dr. Patel muttered, 4 hours into the examination. She had just completed the autopsy on Trevor Winters, the 5th victim, with the same lack of findings. Healthy adults don't just die without cause. I had been thinking the same thing, growing more uneasy with each inconclusive result. But as she prepared to examine Alyssa Newman, something caught my attention. "Wait," I said, moving closer. "What's that on her arm?" Dr. Patel followed my gaze to a small, almost imperceptible mark on Alyssa's inner forearm, a tiny red dot, like an injection site. "Good catch," she said, adjusting her light to examine it better. "Definitely a puncture wound. Recent." She checked the other arm and found nothing, then methodically examined the rest of the body. No other punctures were visible. "Check the others," I suggested, returning to the bodies she'd already examined. Dr. Patel found similar marks on each one, a single puncture wound on the inner forearm, so small it had been easy to overlook. "Injection sites," she confirmed. "All in the same location, like the brands, too precise to be coincidental. This discovery led her to modify her approach for the final 2 autopsies. When she reached Kyle Braddock, the last victim, she spent extra time examining the puncture site on his arm, taking multiple tissue samples from the area. "There's something here," she said, her voice tight with concentration. A foreign object under the skin. Using careful dissection, she exposed what appeared to be a thin metal rod embedded in the subcutaneous tissue of Kyle's forearm, aligned with the puncture mark on the skin. Now, what I'm about to tell you kind of makes things more disturbing. One of the males of the group apparently had a long metal rod stuck into his forearm. And I don't mean when he fell. The coroner noticed something underneath the skin. Upon cutting it out, it was this long, strange, round piece of maybe roughly no more than 8 inches in length total. Right in his forearm. It resembled the cylinder I'd found in the underground chamber, but smaller. Perhaps 3 inches long and extremely thin, like a slender needle. Dr. Patel extracted it carefully and placed it in a specimen container. "I need to check the others again," she said, returning to the previously examined bodies with renewed purpose. One by one, she located similar objects in each victim, all in the same position in the left forearm, all the same size and apparent composition. 7 metal rods from 7 bodies. "What are they?" I asked, staring at the lined-up specimen containers. "I've never seen anything like them," Dr. Patel admitted. "They appear to be metal, but..." She picked up one container, tilting it under the light. "The texture is unusual. I'll need to run tests." When doing a further analysis on this piece of metal, it also turned out to be no known type of metal that we have here on Earth. For as small as it was, in girth and size, it was incredibly strong. It would not bend. It was in no way malleable and emitted static electricity at times. As Dr. Patel prepared the mysterious objects for analysis, I used the morgue phone to call Melissa. "Find anything on the evidence?" I asked when she answered. "The phone's battery died completely before we could extract any data," she reported. "Tech team is working on it now. The stone has those same symbols we saw in the cave. And the metal cylinder?" She paused. "John, it's not reading as any known metal on our preliminary tests." The lab's fascinated. I glanced at the specimen containers holding the rods from the victim's arms. "We found something else. Similar objects embedded in each victim's arm. Dr. Patel is about to run tests on them." "Jesus," Melissa breathed. "What the hell happened out there?" "I don't know," I admitted. "But it's bigger than a hiking accident. Get the sheriff involved. We need a full investigation." After hanging up, I rejoined Dr. Patel, who was preparing to run initial tests on one of the metal rods. She placed it on a small scale, then frowned at the readout. "That can't be right," she muttered, recalibrating the instrument and trying again. Same result. "This thing weighs almost nothing, less than a gram." Yet when she attempted to bend or break it using forceps, the rod remained perfectly rigid. Even more strangely, when she placed it near the electronic equipment, the displays flickered momentarily. "It's affecting the electrical systems," she noted, quickly moving it away. Some kind of interference. Further tests yielded equally perplexing results. The rod couldn't be scratched or marred by a scalpel. It maintained a constant temperature regardless of environmental conditions, and most disturbingly, when placed under certain light wavelengths, it seemed to emit a faint glow of its own. "I need more specialized equipment for this," Dr. Patel finally admitted, "and expertise beyond what I have. This isn't like any material I've encountered." By the time we finished, it was past midnight. The storm raged outside, rattling the windows of the morgue with its fury. Dr. Patel had compiled her preliminary findings, or lack thereof, and secured the bodies and mysterious objects for further examination. "The brands," I said as we prepared to leave. "Did you recognize the pattern?" She shook her head. "Nothing I've seen before. It resembles some astronomical symbols, perhaps, or mathematical notation. But it's not from any medical or scientific context I know." I nodded, unsurprised. Nothing about this case aligned with established patterns or explanations. "I'll have more after the toxicology reports," she promised. "And once we get the specialized analysis on those objects." I thanked her for her thoroughness and headed upstairs to find Sheriff Dalton waiting for me in the hospital lobby. Miles Dalton was a 20-year veteran of law enforcement, with a weathered face and cautious eyes that came with the job in a place like Blackwood County. "Heard you found something unusual up there," he said by way of greeting. I almost laughed at the understatement. "You could say that." Melissa briefed me on the basics. 7 dead, no obvious cause, strange marks, metal objects. He gestured toward the cafeteria. "Buy you a coffee?" "Sounds like we have a lot to discuss." Over bitter hospital coffee, I detailed everything we'd found, from the abandoned campsite to the sinkhole to the baffling autopsy results. Dalton listened without interruption, his expression growing increasingly troubled. "So we're looking at what?" he asked when I'd finished. "Murder?" Some kind of cult activity? I don't know, I admitted. The brands suggest ritual. The embedded objects suggest something else. I hesitated, reluctant to voice the thoughts that had been forming in my mind. It doesn't fit any pattern I recognize. Dalton nodded slowly. I'll open a formal investigation. First thing tomorrow, I'll send deputies to secure the scene. Though with this storm, they might not be able to reach it immediately. There's something else, I said, lowering my voice despite the empty cafeteria. That smell at the site, it was wrong. Too strong, too pervasive for bodies that had been dead only a day or two in freezing temperatures. Could have been an animal carcass nearby, Dalton suggested. Bear, maybe. Or multiple smaller animals. Maybe, I agreed, not believing it. But we found nothing else. Well, whatever happened, we'll figure it out, Dalton said with more confidence than I felt. We always do. But as I drove home through the howling storm at 2 a.m., I wasn't so sure. This felt different from anything we'd encountered before. The strange symbols, the inexplicable deaths, the alien objects embedded in human flesh. It all pointed to something beyond our usual framework of understanding. And that smell, that horrible, all-encompassing stench of death that seemed to emanate from nowhere and everywhere, continued to haunt me, clinging to my memory as it had clung to my clothes. Caroline was asleep when I arrived home, having left a note on the kitchen counter. Found them? I wrote a simple yes beneath it, unable to explain more on paper, unsure if I could explain it at all. As I showered again, trying to wash away the lingering psychological residue of the day, I found myself staring at my own forearm, half expecting to see a telltale puncture mark appearing on my skin. These things about the body are things that I did not myself see personally, but things I was told through friends and the coroner himself. A huge investigation was conducted, by not just on these hikers but the entire surrounding area, and nothing could be found. No trace of these hikers' disappearances, no trace of their deaths or murder, no trace of a murderer, and no trace of this putrid death smell that still lingered in the area once these bodies were long gone. In fact, the smell only seemed to extend and reach further out, lasting up to 4 weeks after this happened, before just one day suddenly disappeared. The storm raged for 3 days, dropping over 4 feet of snow on Blackwood National Park and the surrounding county. Roads were impassable, power lines down, and communications spotty at best. I spent the time compiling my official report, though I found myself struggling with how to document aspects of the case that defied conventional explanation. When the weather finally cleared enough for emergency vehicles to move freely, Sheriff Dalton assembled a task force to investigate the deaths. I was included as the SAR coordinator, along with Melissa, Dr. Patel, 2 county detectives, a forensic specialist, and a representative from the FBI field office in the state capitol. Our first meeting took place at the sheriff's department, a windowless conference room filled with maps, photographs, and preliminary reports. Agent Rebecca Larson from the FBI sat quietly in the corner, observing more than participating as Sheriff Dalton outlined what we knew. 7 victims, identified as Jason Mercer, Eliza Carpenter, Daniel and Sophia Rodriguez, Trevor Winters, Alyssa Newman, and Kyle Braddock, found in an unmapped sinkhole approximately 7 miles from the east entrance of Blackwood National Park. He pointed to the location on the topographical map pinned to the wall. No obvious cause of death, Dr. Patel continued. Toxicology reports came back negative for common substances. No environmental causes like carbon monoxide or methane exposure. No signs of violence or struggle beyond the identical brand marks found on each victim's left cheek. She displayed photographs of the brands, clinical, close-up images that somehow looked more disturbing in the harsh fluorescent light of the conference room than they had in the morgue. And these objects? Agent Larson spoke for the first time, gesturing to the images of the metal rods. Still being analyzed, Dr. Patel replied. Initial tests are inconclusive. They appear to be some kind of metal alloy, but it doesn't match any known composition in our databases. What about the markings in the cave? Detective Harding asked. Any progress identifying those? Melissa took this question. We've consulted with anthropologists and archaeologists from the state university. They confirm similar symbols have been found in other cave systems in the region, but there's disagreement about their origin and meaning. Some attribute them to indigenous populations from 3,000 to 5,000 years ago. Others suggest they may be more recent. And the stone found in the victim's hand? Sheriff Dalton prompted. Same symbols, Melissa confirmed. Lab confirms it's local limestone, likely from the cave itself. What about the phone? I asked. Any data recovered? Detective Harding nodded. Tech team managed to extract the contents. Last text message was sent 3 days before the bodies were discovered, matching what we already knew. But there was something else, a video recorded approximately 12 hours before estimated time of death. He moved to the laptop connected to the room's projector and pulled up a file. Warning, this is disturbing. The video began playing on the wall screen. It showed a shaky, handheld shot of what appeared to be the inside of a tent, illuminated by a flashlight. Jason Mercer's voice came through, breathless and excited. Day 3 at Blackwood. We found something incredible yesterday. Some kind of underground chamber that's not on any of the park maps. Eliza thinks it might be part of the limestone cave system that runs through this region, but if so, it's completely unmapped. The camera turned to show Eliza, who was examining something small in her hands, the stone with the strange symbols. These markings are everywhere down there, Jason continued, panning to show similar stones they had apparently collected. We're going back today for a more thorough exploration. Trevor rigged up some proper climbing gear so we can descend safely. The video cut abruptly, then resumed, showing what was clearly the interior of the cave we had found. The 7 hikers were visible, their headlamps creating crisscrossing beams in the darkness. They looked excited, not afraid. This chamber extends further than we thought, Jason's voice narrated as he panned around. There's some kind of tunnel system beyond that narrow passage. We're going to check it out. The camera followed as the group moved through the tunnel I had discovered during our recovery operation, emerging into the smaller chamber with the pedestal. Look at this, Alyssa called, her voice echoing slightly. Some kind of altar? The camera zoomed in on the pedestal, showing that the depression on top contained what appeared to be a metallic object. The cylinder I had found half buried in the dirt. Don't touch it, Daniel cautioned, but Trevor was already reaching for it. It's warm, Trevor said, surprise evident in his voice as he lifted the cylinder. And light, like it's hollow. As he held it up, the cylinder seemed to catch the light strangely, reflecting it in patterns that matched the symbols on the walls. For a brief moment, the camera captured all 7 hikers standing around the pedestal, their faces illuminated by this unusual reflection. Then the video abruptly cut to static for several seconds before resuming with a much darker, shakier shot. Jason appeared to be running, his breathing heavy and panicked. The camera caught glimpses of trees, snow, darkness. Something's following us, he gasped. Ever since we left the cave. We can't see it, but it's there. The others, he broke off, turning the camera to show the other 6 hikers stumbling through the forest behind him. They all looked disoriented, confused. We need to go back, Eliza was saying, her voice oddly flat. We need to return it. No, Jason responded. Something's wrong. Something's happening to all of you. We need to get help. The camera swung wildly as Jason apparently stumbled, then steadied on a shot of the night sky between tree branches. A strange light moved across the frame, not the moon, not an aircraft, but something that seemed to pulse and shift in ways that defied normal movement patterns. Jason's voice came again, now a whisper. What is that? What is? The video ended abruptly. Silence filled the conference room as the screen went dark. No one spoke for several long moments. What the hell did we just watch? Detective Harding finally asked. Clearly they found something in that cave, Sheriff Dalton said, his voice carefully neutral. Something that may have led to their deaths. The timestamp on this video places it at approximately 11:30 p.m., 2 nights before we found the bodies, Detective Harding noted. Their estimated time of death is around noon the following day, according to Dr. Patel's assessment. So they survived the night after this recording, I said, trying to construct a timeline. But something happened the next day. We need to get back to that site, Sheriff Dalton decided. Full forensic team. Document everything in that cave system. The weather's still difficult up there, I cautioned, but passable with proper equipment. I'll coordinate with our evidence response team, Agent Larson said, speaking up again. This falls within federal jurisdiction as it occurred in a national park. Planning for the site investigation took another day, during which additional analyses were conducted on the metal rods extracted from the victims. Dr. Patel forwarded the preliminary results to our task force via email. The objects removed from the victims' forearms defy conventional material analysis. They are composed of an unidentified metallic alloy that exhibits several anomalous properties. 1. Extreme lightweight yet exceptional structural integrity. 2. Resistance to all attempted deformation or damage. 3. Slight electromagnetic emission. 4. No radioactivity detected, but unusual energy signature present. I've sent samples to the FBI laboratory for more advanced testing. In my 22 years of forensic pathology, I have never encountered any material with these properties. The return expedition to the sinkhole was scheduled for the following day. Our team consisted of Sheriff Dalton, Detective Harding, Agent Larson, Melissa, myself, and 4 FBI evidence specialists. The journey was arduous, with deep snow and fallen trees blocking much of the trail. But we reached the site by early afternoon. The sinkhole remained as we had left it, the edges now crusted with ice and snow. But something had changed. The smell, that horrible stench of decay that had nearly overwhelmed us during the recovery operation, was stronger than before. "What is that?" Agent Larson asked, grimacing behind her mask. "That's what we've been trying to figure out," I replied. "It was present when we found the bodies, but it's intensified since then." "Despite the bodies being removed," Melissa added, "and despite the freezing temperatures, which should suppress decomposition odors, we set up a pulley system and began our descent into the sinkhole." The main chamber appeared unchanged, though our powerful lights revealed details I had missed during the recovery operation. Additional symbols carved into the higher portions of the walls, and what looked like a fine dark residue on the stone floor. "Take samples of everything," Agent Larson instructed her team. "Every surface, every substance." We proceeded to the smaller chamber with the pedestal, which I had only briefly examined during our previous visit. In daylight, filtered down through the sinkhole entrance, the space revealed new details. The symbols on the walls were arranged in concentric circles, radiating outward from the pedestal at the center. "These aren't random," Detective Harding observed, photographing the patterns. "There's a deliberate design here." "Look at this," called one of the evidence technicians, who had been examining the pedestal. "There's some kind of mechanism built into it." Upon closer inspection, the seemingly solid stone pedestal contained a series of moving parts, rings that could be rotated to align different symbols, similar to a combination lock. The depression on top, where the metal cylinder had been found, appeared to be just one component of a more complex structure. "This isn't ancient indigenous art," Melissa said, her voice hushed with realization. "This is technology." As the evidence team continued their documentation and collection, Sheriff Dalton, Agent Larson, and I explored further, discovering that the tunnel system extended deeper than I had initially realized. Beyond the pedestal chamber, a narrow passage descended at a steep angle, eventually opening into a much larger cavern. This space was different, clearly natural rather than constructed, with stalactites hanging from the ceiling and a small underground stream running along one wall. But even here, the strange symbols appeared, carved into the natural rock formations in patterns that seemed to follow the water's flow. "How far does this go?" Sheriff Dalton wondered, his voice echoing in the vast space. "Unknown," Agent Larson replied, consulting a handheld device. "But we're already nearly 200 feet below the surface." We decided not to proceed further without proper caving equipment and additional personnel. As we made our way back to the main chamber, I noticed something that had escaped my attention before. Small, almost imperceptible holes drilled into the walls at regular intervals, each about the diameter of a pencil. "These weren't made by natural processes," I pointed out to Agent Larson. "They're too precise, too uniform." She examined one closely with a penlight. "They appear to form some kind of grid pattern throughout the chamber. Almost like sensors," I finished, the realization dawning. "Or emitters." By the time we completed our investigation and returned to the surface, night was falling. The evidence team had collected dozens of samples and hundreds of photographs. Agent Larson had been in regular communication with her superiors, her expression growing increasingly grave with each conversation. As we prepared to depart, she pulled me aside. "Mitchell, what we found down there, it doesn't align with any known cultural artifacts or natural formations. My office is classifying this investigation effective immediately." "Classifying?" I echoed, disbelieving. "These are 7 dead civilians. Their families deserve answers, and they'll get them," she assured me, though her tone lacked conviction. "But through proper channels, after we've determined exactly what we're dealing with here." I wanted to argue further but was interrupted by a call from Melissa, who had been monitoring the perimeter of the site. "John, you need to see this." I followed her voice to the edge of the clearing, where she stood staring at the snow-covered ground. In the fading daylight, I could see what had alarmed her. A set of tracks leading away from the sinkhole into the dense forest. But they weren't human tracks. They weren't animal tracks either, at least not from any species I recognized. The impressions were oddly shaped, with 3 pointed extensions like toes, but larger than any known predator in the region. And they appeared to have been made recently, the edges still sharp in the crusty snow. "What made these?" Sheriff Dalton asked, crouching to examine them. No one had an answer. As we followed the tracks to the tree line, they simply stopped, not gradually fading, but ending abruptly as though whatever had made them had suddenly vanished or been lifted away. Keep in mind this place is covered in at least 2-3 feet of snow. Temperatures are often dropping down at 10 degrees at night, and yet this rotting flesh, putrid death smell was as pungent as ever. It was like being trapped in the back of a van or so, with dead, rotting animals in the summertime in 100-degree heat. The odor was that strong. Our return to Blackwood was subdued, each of us lost in our own thoughts about what we had discovered. The next morning, I arrived at the sheriff's office to find an unfamiliar black SUV parked outside, and two men in dark suits, speaking with Sheriff Dalton in his private office. Melissa intercepted me in the hallway. "Something's happening," she said in a low voice. "Agent Larson has been recalled to Washington. These new guys arrived an hour ago. They're not FBI. They won't say which agency they're with." Before I could respond, Sheriff Dalton's door opened, and he beckoned me inside. The two men regarded me with polite but evaluating expressions. "John Mitchell," one of them said, not offering his hand. "I understand you led the recovery operation at the Blackwood sinkhole." "That's right," I confirmed, looking to Sheriff Dalton for explanation. "These gentlemen are from a federal task force," Dalton said, his expression carefully neutral. "They're taking over the investigation." "What task force?" I asked. "This is a local matter. 7 dead hikers. It's a matter of national security now," the second man interrupted smoothly. "We'll need all your reports, all evidence collected, and detailed statements from everyone involved in the recovery and subsequent investigation." Over the next 2 days, I was interviewed extensively about every aspect of the case, as were Melissa, Dr. Patel, and everyone else connected to it. The strange metal objects, the stone with symbols, the samples from the cave, all were confiscated and transported to an undisclosed location. A week after their arrival, the men departed as suddenly as they had appeared. Sheriff Dalton called me into his office again, his expression troubled. "The case is closed, John," he said without preamble. "Closed?" I echoed in disbelief. "How can it be closed? We don't even know what happened to those people." "Official cause of death has been determined as environmental exposure and accidental fall," he replied, not meeting my eyes. "The families have been notified. The bodies are being released for burial." "That's bullshit, Miles, and you know it," I said, anger rising. "Those people didn't die from exposure or a fall. What about the brands, the metal objects in their arms, the video?" Dalton sighed heavily. "There is no video, John. There are no metal objects. The marks on their faces have been attributed to contact with mineral deposits in the cave. The case is closed." I stared at him, unable to process what I was hearing. "They're covering it up." "Why? I don't know," he admitted quietly. "But I do know that pushing this further will cost us our jobs at minimum, maybe worse. Whatever those hikers found, someone very powerful wants it kept quiet." I left his office in a daze, unable to reconcile the official conclusion with what I had seen with my own eyes. That night, I returned home to find Caroline waiting for me, concern etched on her face. "Someone came by the house today," she said. "2 men in suits. They asked about your involvement in the Blackwood case. They were insistent." A chill ran through me. "What did you tell them?" "Only what you've told me, which isn't much," she replied. "John, what's going on? What did you find out there?" I looked at my wife of 12 years, the person I trusted most in the world, and found myself unable to answer truthfully. Not because I didn't trust her, but because I couldn't make sense of it myself. And because I was afraid of what knowing might mean for her. "It's over," I said instead. "Case closed. Accidental deaths." She knew I was withholding something but didn't press. Instead, she asked, "Are you in danger?" "No," I answered, hoping it was true. "But I think it's best if I don't discuss the details, even with you, for now." In the days that followed, life gradually returned to normal. The strange deaths at Blackwood became local legend, whispered about but officially explained away. The sinkhole was filled in, the area declared hazardous and off-limits due to geological instability. And yet, for weeks afterward, hikers and park rangers reported the same horrible smell permeating the forest around the former site, a stench of decay that seemed to grow stronger rather than dissipate with time. Then, exactly 4 weeks after we had discovered the bodies, the smell vanished. Not gradually fading, but disappearing completely overnight, as though it had never existed at all. Well, I can only myself speculate on all the things it could be. I could tell you what it definitely is not. I do not believe that these hikers were murdered in any way. I believe that after everything I know, something else much darker happened to them. Were they abducted? I don't know. I can't say that. But something took them from their campsite, 650 meters up from this spot, and placed them down in this hole in the earth, 40 feet down, where they were all dead. 3 months passed. Spring came to Blackwood County, melting the deep snowdrifts and bringing new life to the forests. On the surface, everything had returned to normal. I continued my work with search and rescue, responding to the usual calls, lost hikers, injured climbers, the occasional stranded motorist. But beneath this veneer of normalcy, I remained haunted by what we had found in that sinkhole. Sleep became elusive, interrupted by nightmares of dark chambers and strange symbols. I found myself obsessively researching obscure archaeological findings, unexplained disappearances in national parks, and scientific anomalies. Caroline noticed, of course. How could she not? But she respected my silence on the matter, supporting me in other ways, making sure I ate properly, encouraging me to spend time outdoors when I wasn't working, gently steering conversations away from anything related to Blackwood National Park when others brought it up. Then came the letter. It arrived on a Tuesday morning, hand-delivered to our mailbox without postage or return address. My name was written on the envelope in neat, precise handwriting I didn't recognize. Inside was a single sheet of paper containing an address in the neighboring county and a date and time, Thursday, 8 p.m. Nothing else. No signature, no explanation. I should have reported it to Sheriff Dalton. I should have thrown it away. Instead, I tucked it into my pocket and told no one. Thursday evening found me driving alone to the specified address, which turned out to be a small roadside diner about 40 miles from Blackwood. The place was nearly empty when I arrived. Just an elderly couple in one booth, and a solitary figure in the farthest corner, face obscured by a newspaper. I ordered coffee from the disinterested waitress and waited, unsure what to expect. After a few minutes, the newspaper lowered, revealing a face I recognized immediately. Dr. Eleanor Patel. She gestured for me to join her, which I did, sliding into the booth across from her. "Thank you for coming," she said quietly. "I wasn't sure you would." "Why all the secrecy?" I asked, keeping my voice low. "Because what I'm about to tell you could cost us both more than our jobs," she replied. Her usually composed face showed signs of the same strain I'd been feeling. Dark circles under her eyes, new lines around her mouth. She reached into her bag and withdrew a small, sealed container, which she placed on the table between us. Through the clear plastic, I could see a familiar metallic object, one of the rods we had extracted from the hiker's arms. "How did you?" I began. "I kept one," she interrupted, "before they confiscated everything. I couldn't just let it go, not without answers." I stared at the object, feeling a mixture of dread and vindication. "So they do exist. The official report is a lie," she finished. "A fabrication. Those hikers didn't die from exposure or a fall. They didn't even die from anything I can identify in my extensive medical career." She leaned forward. "I've spent the last 3 months analyzing this thing in private, using equipment borrowed from colleagues under false pretenses. And John, it's not from here." "The park?" I asked, though I already suspected what she meant. "Earth," she clarified. "The metallurgical composition includes elements that don't exist on the periodic table. The internal structure defies known physics, and it emits a frequency that can't be detected by standard equipment. I only found it by accident using an experimental scanner developed by a friend at the university." I felt cold despite the diner's warmth. "What are you saying exactly?" "I'm saying that whatever those hikers encountered in that cave wasn't human technology. It wasn't ancient indigenous artifacts. It was something else entirely." We sat in silence for a moment, the implications hanging between us. "There's more," Dr. Patel continued eventually. "I managed to access some of the brain tissue samples I took from the victims before they were confiscated. They showed cellular changes I've never seen before, neural pathways altered in ways that shouldn't be possible without major physical trauma. Yet there was no such trauma present." "What kind of alterations?" I asked. "It's as if their brains were rewired somehow. Specific regions related to perception, memory, and consciousness showed microscopic changes consistent with some kind of targeted modification." "By the objects in their arms," she nodded. "That would be my hypothesis. The metal rods seemed designed to interface with the human nervous system. They were positioned precisely along major nerve pathways in the forearm that connect directly to the brain." My mind flashed back to the video we had seen, the hikers' strange behavior after discovering the metal cylinder in the cave, Eliza's flat voice saying they needed to return it. "They were being controlled," I said, the realization crystallizing. Something was influencing them through these devices, or communicating with them, Dr. Patel suggested, or studying them. We can only speculate on the purpose. "What about the brands? The symbols?" "I believe they're connected to the frequency these devices emit. Possibly some kind of marking system. Identification, perhaps." I took a sip of my now cold coffee, trying to process everything. "Why are you telling me this now? Why the secrecy?" Dr. Patel's expression darkened. "Because 2 weeks ago, I received a visit from the same men who took over our investigation. They knew I had kept a sample. They threatened my career, my family." She paused. "And then they offered me a job, studying similar materials at a classified facility." "What did you tell them?" I said I needed time to consider. "But the truth is, I'm afraid, John. Not just of them, but of what this means. If these objects are what I think they are, then something non-human is operating in our backyard. Something with technology far beyond our understanding. Something that can kill without leaving a trace. And the government knows, I added. They're covering it up, she nodded. Which means it's happened before. The question is, how many times? And why Blackwood? We talked for another hour, sharing theories and observations that we'd both been afraid to voice to anyone else. Dr. Patel had done extensive research into similar cases across the country. Hikers and campers found dead under mysterious circumstances, often in remote wilderness areas, often without clear cause of death. There's a pattern, she explained. Most incidents occur in or near national parks. Most involve groups rather than individuals, and most have some geographical feature in common. Caves, sinkholes, unusual rock formations, like the cave system under Blackwood, I noted. Exactly. I think these entities, whatever they are, have been here a long time. The symbols we found may have been warnings left by indigenous peoples who encountered them centuries ago. As our conversation wound down, Dr. Patel carefully returned the metal rod to her bag. I'm leaving town tomorrow. I've accepted a position at a hospital in Arizona, as far from Blackwood as I could manage. You're running, I observed, not judgmentally. Yes, she admitted without shame. I have children, John. I can't risk their safety by pursuing this further. But I couldn't leave without telling someone else what I'd learned. Someone who saw what I saw. What should I do with this information? I asked. She considered the question carefully. That's for you to decide. But be careful. These people, whoever they are, they're watching. They've invested considerable resources in keeping this quiet. We parted ways in the parking lot, Dr. Patel heading west while I returned home, my mind spinning with revelations and questions. I told Caroline I'd been working late, hating the lie but unable to burden her with the truth. That night, I made a decision. I wouldn't run like Dr. Patel, but I wouldn't recklessly pursue the truth either. I would watch, wait, and document. If something was happening in Blackwood, something beyond human understanding, then evidence would eventually surface again. And when it did, I would be ready. In the months that followed, I compiled a private record of everything related to the case, my memories, observations, conversations with Dr. Patel, and research into similar incidents across the country. I kept this record secure, separate from my home and work, telling no one of its existence. Life continued. Seasons changed. Blackwood National Park received its usual flow of visitors, none aware of what had happened in that remote section now marked as closed due to environmental hazards. Oh, and I should also mention that their time of death all seemed to be about the same time. What everything pointed to was that they were somehow taken or they disappeared. They were branded. Judging by the evidence, I'm assuming they were all killed somehow and placed together in this hole in the earth. A year after finding those 7 bodies, I was called to a new search and rescue operation. 3 hikers missing in the western quadrant of the park, an area miles from the previous incident. We found their campsite undisturbed, equipment intact, no signs of struggle or wildlife interference, and as we expanded our search perimeter, the dogs began behaving strangely, pulling toward an area not marked on our maps, an area where a familiar, putrid smell hung in the still forest air. History, it seemed, was repeating itself. But this time, I knew what we might be dealing with. This time, I was prepared to document everything, to preserve evidence before it could be confiscated or explained away. Because whatever was happening in Blackwood National Park, whatever had killed those 7 hikers and branded them with alien symbols and implanted foreign objects in their flesh, it wasn't finished. It was just waiting, watching, perhaps learning from each encounter. It's stories like these that really rattle your brain at night. Because a lot of times you'll have very normal search and rescue missions. People disappear, you find them, everything is okay. Or you don't find them and everything is not okay. But oftentimes, search and rescue missions happen where you don't find or do find somebody, and there are some very disturbing attributes to their entire disappearance. I don't know what we're dealing with in those woods. I don't know if it's something that evolved alongside us, undetected for centuries, or something that came from elsewhere. I don't know if the government is actively collaborating with it, or merely covering up its existence to prevent panic. What I do know is this. 7 people died in Blackwood National Park after encountering something beyond human understanding. Their deaths were covered up by forces with the power to rewrite reality on paper, to make evidence disappear, to threaten and coerce those who knew the truth. And it will happen again. Perhaps in Blackwood, perhaps elsewhere. The patterns are there if you know how to look for them. The missing hikers, the inexplicable deaths, the strange phenomena reported briefly before being dismissed or rationalized away. So I continue my work with search and rescue, helping those I can, and watching for signs of something beyond our comprehension, operating in the wilderness we falsely believe we've tamed. I maintain my records, adding to them whenever I find new information or connections, and I wonder sometimes if I'm being watched in return. If the strange metal devices that killed those hikers might one day find their way under my own skin, sending signals to whatever intelligence designed them. In the dark of night when sleep eludes me, I sometimes find myself touching my left cheek, half expecting to feel the raised pattern of a brand I cannot see. And I listen for sounds that shouldn't exist, smell for odors that have no natural source, and wait for the day when the truth can no longer be buried in a filled-in sinkhole in the remote wilderness of Blackwood National Park. Or when I look in the mirror, I'll see the mark on my own face and know that I'm already part of whatever happened to those 7 hikers. That I have been, perhaps, since the moment I descended into that hole in the earth and breathed in the inexplicable stench of death that came from everywhere and nowhere at once. Look, I'll be honest with you. I wish I myself had more answers, and clearly I don't. That's kind of why I'm sharing this story with you, in hopes that maybe you can kind of bounce me back some speculations and maybe some theories about what you think could have happened. I know you're not necessarily a guru, but surely you've read enough and researched enough that there has to be some sort of explanation. I mean, I don't know what else to think. If my mind goes the whole alien UFO route, I feel crazy. But if my mind goes the route of a murderer or some sort of occultic rituals, I think of the logistics and the practicality of how all this took place, and how none of this makes sense or even seems probable. The truth is out there in those woods, buried beneath layers of official denial and classification. And one day, I intend to find it, before it finds me. I knew the day was going to be rough when the donut shop ran out of glazed. That's the kind of omen that makes you wonder if you should just call it quits early. But no, I still had a job to do. Been doing it for 12 years here in Craven Springs, West Virginia. Name's Michael Prescott, small-town cop. Born and raised right here in the same place. Craven ain't big, but it's home. You know the type. A few thousand people, everyone's in your business, and if you don't wave to Mrs. Hill at the corner store, you'll hear about it from your mama the next day. I slouched back to my cruiser, settling for a stale chocolate donut that would have been better used as a hockey puck. The April morning was gloomy, clouds hanging low like they were deciding whether to ruin everyone's day or just mine. The radio crackled with static before Joanne's voice came through. "Mike, you copy? Got a call from the Wilsons about some disturbance out near Pike Hollow." I sighed, brushing crumbs from my uniform. What kind of disturbance? Teenagers again? Unclear. Sounded spooked, though. Said they heard strange noises while hiking. Not animal noises, not human either. Yeah, we get bored in Craven Springs. Not a lot happens here. Except the occasional drunk out at the mine or some idiot getting into a bar fight at Rusty's. But things had been quiet this month. Too quiet if you ask me. Which is why, when the call came in about something going down in the woods off Pike Hollow Road, I didn't think twice. Probably some kids messing around again, getting themselves into trouble. Last time it was a bunch of teenagers trying to start a campfire during a burn ban. Figured this was the same kind of deal. I grabbed my coffee, lukewarm now, and headed out to Pike Hollow. The road twisted through town, past the shuttered textile mill and the elementary school where I'd spent my childhood. Folks waved as I drove by. Old man Jenkins sweeping his porch, Brenda walking her 3-legged dog, kids playing hopscotch who probably should have been in school. The familiar sights of Craven Springs always brought me comfort. But today something felt off. Maybe it was the lack of my glazed donut, or maybe it was the way the clouds seemed to gather specifically above Pike Hollow, darkening as I approached. Pike Hollow Road wasn't on most maps. It was a local secret, a dirt path cutting through dense woods where hunters went during season and teenagers went to drink stolen beers. The road deteriorated quickly after leaving the main highway, rutted and narrow, branches scraping against my cruiser like fingernails. It was late afternoon by the time I made it out there. The sky a dull gray, like it couldn't decide whether to rain or just stay miserable. Pike Hollow Road wasn't more than a dirt path that cut into the woods, the kind of place you only go if you're hunting or hiding from something. Dispatch hadn't said much, just that there were strange noises, which usually translated to someone saw a raccoon and freaked out. I parked my cruiser at the trailhead, stepped out, and gave a quick look around. The woods were dense here, thick with pine and brush that didn't see much sun. Quiet, too, in a way that didn't sit right. Even the birds were holding their breath. Something about the silence made the hairs on my neck stand up. I'd been in these woods hundreds of times, hunting, responding to calls, sometimes just walking to clear my head. Never had it felt this empty, this wrong. "All right, let's see what you kids are up to," I muttered, grabbing my flashlight and heading into the woods. The path was overgrown, barely visible in places. Spring should have brought new growth, chirping insects, the rustling of small animals. Instead, there was only the sound of my boots crushing dead leaves and the occasional snap of twigs. I pulled out my radio. Joanne, you copy? I'm about a quarter mile in. No sign of anybody yet. The radio crackled with static. I tried again, but the signal was dead. No surprise. Cell service was spotty at best in town, non-existent out here in the hollow. As the trees grew denser, the light dimmed, filtering through branches in weak, scattered beams. The smell changed too, earthy and damp, but with something underneath, something sour, like meat left too long in the sun. A branch cracked somewhere to my left. I swung my flashlight toward the sound, catching only shadows. "Police officer, anyone there?" My voice sounded small in the vast emptiness of the woods. No response. I continued down the path, my unease growing with each step. The Wilsons weren't the type to make calls over nothing. Arnold Wilson was an ex-Marine who'd seen combat in Iraq. His wife, Beth, grew up in these woods. If something spooked them, it wasn't a raccoon or teenagers with firecrackers. The path forked ahead, one branch continuing deeper into the hollow, the other rising toward a ridge. I hesitated, then noticed something caught on a thorn bush by the lower path. A scrap of fabric, blue flannel. "Hello?" I called again, louder this time. "Anyone need help?" Only silence answered. I followed the lower path, moving slower now, more cautious. The trees seemed to press closer, branches reaching like gnarled hands. The gray sky had disappeared completely, hidden by the thick canopy. Though it was only late afternoon, the forest floor was dark as twilight. The path ended abruptly at a small clearing, circular and unnatural looking, as if someone had deliberately cut away the vegetation. In the center stood a large oak, ancient and twisted, its trunk swollen and deformed, and at its base, a boot. Not just any boot, a hiking boot, heavy-duty, expensive, the kind Arnold Wilson would wear. "Arnold?" I called, sweeping my flashlight around the clearing. "Beth?" "It's Officer Prescott." Something rustled behind me. I spun around, heart racing, but saw nothing but shadows. Yet I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched, of eyes tracking my movements from the darkness between the trees. I stepped forward and picked up the boot. It wasn't just abandoned. It had been torn, the leather ripped and shredded, and it was still warm, as if recently removed, or torn from someone's foot. That's when I noticed the first splash of red on the ground, dark against the brown leaves. Blood. Fresh. A trail of it led away from the clearing, deeper into the woods where the trees grew so dense that daylight barely penetrated. I should have called for backup. Should have returned to my cruiser, radioed in what I'd found. But something, curiosity, duty, stupid bravery, pushed me forward, following the blood trail into the darkness. It didn't take long to realize this wasn't some teenagers playing a prank. There was something off, and not just the quiet. About 100 yards in, I found a boot. Not like a kid's sneaker, a real hiking boot, heavy duty, meant for rough terrain. "Great, lost hiker," I said, shaking my head. But when I picked it up, it was still warm. I kept walking, now more alert, the kind of alert that tells you something's out of place, but you can't quite put your finger on it. A few minutes later, I spotted something else, a smear of something dark on the trunk of a tree. Blood. The smear was at shoulder height, a handprint dragged downward, as if someone had leaned against the tree, then collapsed. I played my flashlight around the area, revealing more blood, drops and smears, leading further into the darkness. Suddenly the woods didn't feel so peaceful anymore. I wasn't armed. Yeah, I know. A cop without a gun. But the truth is, here in Craven Springs you don't usually need one. Last time I used it was to scare off a coyote messing with some cattle. My service pistol was locked up back at the station, along with my bulletproof vest. Didn't think I'd need them for a simple call about noises in the woods. Big mistake. As daylight faded, the shadows deepened, merging into a darkness that my flashlight barely penetrated. The blood trail continued, no longer just smears but puddles now, black in the dim light. I followed it around a dense thicket and stopped dead. Ahead, the trail opened onto another clearing, smaller than the first, and in its center lay a backpack, torn open, its contents scattered across the forest floor. A water bottle, a map, a first aid kit, and more blood. So much more blood. The coppery smell hit me first, thick and overwhelming. Then I saw the source, a dark shape slumped against a fallen log, a body. I approached slowly, my flashlight trained on the figure. It was a man, middle-aged, dressed in hiking gear. His face was turned away, but I recognized the jacket, Arnold Wilson's favorite red and black plaid. "Arnold?" I whispered, kneeling beside him. "Can you hear me?" I reached out to check for a pulse, but my hand froze mid-air. The body wasn't just dead, it was wrong. The torso was caved in, ribs protruding at impossible angles. One arm was missing entirely, torn away at the shoulder, and his face, what remained of it, wore an expression of such terror that I felt my own heart stutter. "Jesus," I muttered, scrambling backward. This wasn't an accident. This wasn't a heart attack on the trail or a fall from a ridge. This was violence, predation. Something rustled in the underbrush behind me. I whirled around, my flashlight beam cutting through darkness, catching a glimpse of something moving between the trees. Something large, something fast, something that was now watching me. The deeper I went, the worse it got. I found more blood, not splatters but streaks, like someone had been dragged. The trail led further into the woods, where the trees got thicker, the light barely making it through the canopy. I should have turned back. Every instinct told me to run, to get back to my cruiser and call in what I'd found. But all I could think about was Beth Wilson. If Arnold was dead, where was she? The blood trail continued, smeared across fallen logs and tree trunks. In places, it looked like someone had tried to crawl. Desperate fingernail marks gouged into the soil. I followed it down a steep embankment, my boots sliding on the damp earth. At the bottom, a small stream gurgled through the hollow, water flowing black in the fading light. The blood trail ended at the water's edge, but I could see marks on the opposite bank. Something had crossed. I waded through the shallow water, ice cold around my ankles, and climbed the far bank. Here, the forest changed. The familiar oaks and maples gave way to older growth, gnarled pines with twisted trunks, their branches forming a cathedral-like canopy above. Little undergrowth grew in the perpetual twilight beneath. The silence was absolute. No birds, no insects, not even the whisper of wind through branches. Just the sound of my breathing, too loud in the stillness, and the distant, muffled gurgle of the stream. That's when I heard it. A sound that wasn't quite human, wasn't quite animal. A low, gurgling grunt, like something was choking on its own breath. I froze, my flashlight beam trembling across the forest floor. The sound came again, closer now, to my right. Slowly I turned, directing my light toward it. Nothing but trees and shadows. "All right, Billy," I said to myself, my voice shaking. "Just figure out what it is, call it in, and get out. No need to be a hero." I pushed through the underbrush, my flashlight flickering in and out, casting weird shadows that made the trees look like they were closing in on me. The pine needles underfoot muffled my steps, but they also obscured the ground, hiding roots and stones that threatened to trip me with each step. The gurgling sound grew louder, punctuated now by a wet, tearing noise, like someone ripping apart wet cardboard. Or flesh. I crept forward, moving from tree to tree, using their trunks as cover. The smell hit me first, stronger now, the coppery scent of blood mixed with something fouler, something rotten. Then, I saw something that made me stop dead in my tracks. At first I thought it was just a large deer, or maybe a bear. But no, this thing was wrong. It had the size of a grizzly, but its limbs were too long, too gangly, like a spider with skin stretched tight over bones. The head was misshapen, like someone had taken a wolf and smashed its face in. But the worst part was its mouth, a gaping hole lined with sharp teeth. Not natural, not in any way I'd ever seen before. And it was dragging something, someone, a body. I froze, my breath caught in my throat. Every instinct I had screamed at me to run, but I couldn't move. Not with this thing standing there, gnawing at the mangled body like it was nothing more than a chew toy. The creature hunched over its prey, back to me, massive shoulders working as it tore at flesh. The body beneath it was small, dressed in blue. Beth Wilson. Her eyes were open, staring sightlessly at the canopy above, her mouth frozen in a silent scream. My stomach lurched. I clamped a hand over my mouth to keep from vomiting, to keep from making any sound at all. The creature paused, raising its misshapen head. It sniffed the air, nostrils flaring. It hadn't seen me yet. Thank God. I slowly backed up, hoping the crunch of dead leaves underfoot wouldn't give me away. That's when it looked up. For a split second we locked. I don't want to say eyes because I never saw them. Whatever it had, it knew I was there, and it didn't like being watched. The thing rose to its full height, 7, maybe 8 feet tall, its limbs unfolding like a grotesque marionette. For one horrible moment it just stared at me, head cocked to one side. Then it opened its mouth, revealing rows of teeth like broken glass, and screamed. The sound hit me like a physical force, high-pitched and guttural at once, vibrating through my skull. It wasn't anger in that cry, or hunger. It was hatred, pure and ancient. I turned and ran. I could hear it crashing through the woods behind me, its heavy footfalls shaking the ground. My heart was pounding in my ears, my legs burning as I pushed myself faster than I ever thought possible. Branches whipped at my face as I ran, roots caught at my feet. I stumbled, nearly fell, caught myself against a tree trunk. Behind me, the creature's footsteps grew louder, its breathing a wet, hungry sound, but I knew I wasn't going to make it. This thing was faster, stronger, and hungry. There was a split-second decision. I couldn't outrun it, but maybe I could outsmart it. I veered off the trail, diving into a patch of thick brush. I crouched down, holding my breath, hoping the darkness and the dense foliage would hide me. The noise stopped. I sat there in the silence, my chest heaving. I could feel the adrenaline surging through my veins, the sweat dripping down my face. For a moment, I thought I'd lost it. Then I heard it. Slow, deliberate footsteps. It was searching for me, hunting me, through the leaves. I caught glimpses of it, a massive shape moving between trees, head swinging back and forth as it sniffed the air. It was tracking me, following my scent. I pressed myself deeper into the brush, ignoring the thorns that dug into my skin. My flashlight was off now, clutched in a white-knuckle grip. If I moved, if I made any sound at all, it would find me. The creature paused just yards from my hiding place. In the dim light, I could see it more clearly now. Its skin wasn't fur or hide, but something else. A mottled grayish membrane stretched over a skeletal frame. Where its face should have been was just that terrible mouth and two ragged holes for nostrils. It turned slowly, scanning the forest. Then it dropped to all fours, pressing its face to the ground where I had stepped. It was like watching a dog follow a scent trail, except this was no dog. This was something out of a nightmare. The creature raised its head, looking directly at my hiding place. It knew where I was. It had to. I held my breath, pressed myself into the earth, praying for invisibility. The creature took one step toward me, then another. Then, somewhere in the distance, a branch snapped. The creature's head whipped around toward the sound. It hesitated, torn between the prey it sensed and the new disturbance. Another snap, louder this time, and it made its decision. With a low growl, it loped off toward the noise, disappearing into the darkness. I had to get back to the cruiser, back to the safety of something metal and solid. The radio. I could call for backup. I just needed to move without it hearing me. Slowly, painfully, I crawled from my hiding place. Every muscle screamed in protest, every scratch and bruise making itself known now that the immediate danger had passed. But I couldn't stop, couldn't rest. That thing was still out there, and it wasn't done hunting. As I crawled through the underbrush, the sound of its footsteps grew distant. Maybe it was giving up, or maybe it had found another victim. Either way, I didn't care. All that mattered was getting out alive. I oriented myself toward where I thought the stream was. If I could find it, I could follow it back to where I'd crossed, then retrace my steps to the cruiser. It was my only hope of navigation in the growing darkness. The forest seemed to shift around me, trees looming where I didn't remember them, paths disappearing into solid walls of vegetation. Had I gone in circles? Was I moving deeper into the hollow instead of out? Panic threatened to overwhelm me. I forced it down, focusing on my breathing, on putting one foot in front of the other. I was a cop. I was trained for emergencies. I could do this. After what felt like an eternity, I finally made it back to the trail. But the cruiser was still a ways off. I was about to make a break for it when I heard a scream. Not human, but not animal either. Like something in pain. Against every instinct I had, I stopped. I looked back. What the hell was I thinking? Just run. But something made me freeze again. Maybe it was the fact that if I ran, I'd just lead it back to the town and someone else would get killed. Maybe it was the fact that I'm a cop and it's my job to protect people. I don't know, but I turned back. The scream came again, echoing through the trees. It wasn't the creature's hunting cry, but something different, a sound of pain, of fury. And mixed with it, barely audible, a human voice. Someone else was out there. Someone still alive. I couldn't leave them. Not to that thing. Cursing my own stupidity, I turned away from safety and moved back toward the sounds of conflict. The forest was nearly pitch black now, the last light of day long gone. My flashlight beam seemed feeble against the darkness, illuminating only a few feet ahead. The noises grew louder. Thrashing, snarling, the crack of underbrush. I moved carefully, placing each foot with deliberate silence. One mistake, one snapped twig, and I might draw the creature's attention. I crested a small rise and looked down into a ravine. There, illuminated by moonlight breaking through the canopy, was a scene from hell. The creature was there, thrashing wildly, its movements jerky and uncoordinated. Across from it stood a man, tall and broad-shouldered, holding what looked like a hunting rifle. He had shot it. The crazy bastard had actually shot the thing. The creature lunged at him, but its movements were sluggish now. The man sidestepped, raised his rifle for another shot, but he was too slow. The creature's elongated arm swept out, catching him across the chest, sending him flying. He hit a tree trunk with a sickening thud and crumpled to the ground, the rifle falling from his grasp. The creature shambled toward him, wounded but still deadly. Blood, or something like it, dripped from a hole in its chest, black in the moonlight. I didn't think. I just acted. Rushing down the slope, I grabbed the fallen rifle. The creature spun at the sound of my approach, its ruined face contorting in what might have been surprise. Without even aiming, I fired a shot straight into the creature's chest. It screamed. The sound was like nothing I'd ever heard, a high-pitched wail mixed with the gurgling of blood. It stumbled backward, falling to the ground in a heap of limbs and fur. It wasn't dead, but it wasn't going to be getting up anytime soon. I dropped the rifle, shaking, and bent down to check on the man. He was barely conscious, bleeding from several deep gashes across his torso. His face was pale, eyes unfocused, breath coming in shallow gasps. "You all right?" I asked, though it was obvious he wasn't. He coughed, blood dribbling down his chin. "That thing," was all he managed before his eyes rolled back in his head. I looked at the creature, still twitching on the ground, its breath shallow. Whatever it was dying, and I was glad for it. But I had no time for relief. The man was fading fast, losing blood from multiple wounds. I had to get him help, and soon. I tore strips from my uniform shirt, binding the worst of his gashes as best I could. Then, with strength born of desperation, I hoisted him over my shoulder in a fireman's carry. The weight nearly brought me to my knees, but I steadied myself against a tree. "Hang on," I muttered, though I wasn't sure if he could hear me. "Just hang on." Step by painful step, I carried him back toward the trail, toward my cruiser. Each movement was agony, the man's weight crushing me, my own muscles screaming from exertion and the aftermath of terror. Behind us, the creature's cries grew fainter, then stopped altogether. Had it died, or was it just waiting, gathering strength for another attack? I couldn't afford to find out. The journey back seemed endless. Every landmark I passed was unfamiliar in the darkness, every path a mystery. Twice I had to stop and reorient myself, fighting panic as the night pressed in around us. The man's breathing grew more labored, his blood soaking through my makeshift bandages, warm against my skin. "Stay with me," I urged him. "We're almost there." A lie, but a necessary one, for both of us. When I finally stumbled onto Pike Hollow Road, the side of my cruiser was like a mirage in a desert. It sat exactly where I'd left it, solid and real and safe. I fumbled with the keys, hands slick with blood and sweat, and managed to unlock the back door. Gently, I laid the man across the back seat. In the dome light, I got my first good look at him. Mid-30s, rugged features beneath a week's growth of beard, hunting clothes torn and bloody. Not a local, at least not one I recognized. I slammed the door and ran to the driver's side, jamming the key into the ignition. The engine roared to life, headlights cutting through the darkness. As I threw the car into reverse, something moved at the edge of the headlight's reach. A flicker of movement, a suggestion of that misshapen form. Then nothing. I didn't wait to see more. I gunned the engine, tires spitting gravel as I backed onto the main road, then sped toward town. The radio crackled to life as soon as I hit the highway. "Dispatch, this is Officer Prescott. I need an ambulance at the station ASAP. I've got a man with severe lacerations, massive blood loss." Joanne's voice came back, tense with concern. "Copy that, Mike. What happened out there?" I can't." I glanced in the rearview mirror at the man, his chest barely rising. "Just get that ambulance ready." The drive back to Craven Springs passed in a blur of adrenaline and fear. I kept checking the mirrors, half expecting to see that thing loping after us, its grotesque form illuminated in my taillights, but the road behind us remained empty, the darkness unbroken. When I reached the station, Sheriff Bowman was waiting outside, his weathered face grim in the floodlights. The ambulance arrived seconds later, paramedics rushing to extract the injured man from my back seat. "Jesus, Mike, what happened to you?" Bowman asked, eyeing my torn shirt, the blood staining my hands and face. I opened my mouth to answer, but no words came. How could I explain what I'd seen? Who would believe me? "There's something in the woods," I finally managed. "Something that killed the Wilsons, and it nearly killed this guy too." Bowman's face darkened. "The Wilsons are dead?" I nodded, the horror of what I'd witnessed washing over me anew. "Torn apart, both of them, and whatever did it, it wasn't natural, Sheriff. It wasn't anything I've ever seen before." The paramedics loaded the man onto a stretcher, attaching IV lines, pressing gauze to his wounds. One of them looked up at me, her face drawn. "He's in shock. BP's dropping, we need to move now." As they rushed him toward the ambulance, his eyes fluttered open, fixing on me with sudden clarity. He grabbed my wrist, his grip surprisingly strong for a dying man. "It's still out there," he rasped, blood bubbling between his lips. "You didn't kill it. You can't kill it." Then he fell back, unconscious or worse, and the paramedics whisked him away, sirens wailing as they sped toward the nearest hospital in Beckley, 40 minutes away. I looked at the sheriff, at the questioning faces of the deputies who had gathered. I knew my story would sound insane. I knew they'd have questions I couldn't answer, doubts I couldn't dispel. But I also knew what I'd seen, what was still out there. In the darkness of Pike Hollow, I looked at the sheriff, at the questioning faces of the deputies who had gathered. I knew my story would sound insane. I knew they'd have questions I couldn't answer, doubts I couldn't dispel, but I also knew what I'd seen. What was still out there, in the darkness of Pike Hollow. We need to seal off those woods, I said, my voice steadier than I felt. And we need more men. Armed men. The sheriff nodded slowly, skepticism warring with trust on his weathered face. Tell me everything, Mike. From the beginning. We never did find out what that thing was. The doctors patched the guy up, but he didn't make it through the night. Didn't matter, though. His story died with him. And the thing? Well, let's just say it didn't vanish, but it didn't stick around for long either. They carted it off to some lab upstate for testing, whatever that means. At least, that's the story I repeated to myself in the days that followed. A comforting fiction, easier to swallow than the truth. The truth was messier, darker. The truth was that no one believed me. Sheriff Bowman took my statement that night, his pen scratching across paper as I described the creature, the deaths, my desperate flight through the woods. When I finished, he closed his notebook and sat in silence for a long moment. Mike, he finally said, his voice gentle as if speaking to a child. You've had a hell of a night. You're in shock. I know what I saw, I insisted, anger flaring through exhaustion. What you saw, he continued, was probably a bear. A big one, diseased maybe, or rabid. That would explain the aggression, the attacks on humans. Bears don't have mouths like that, I said. They don't hunt people, track them through the woods. Bowman sighed. When was the last time you slept, Mike? Really slept? The question caught me off guard. What's that got to do with anything? You've been pulling double shifts all week. Stress, fatigue, the darkness. They can play tricks on your mind. I wanted to argue, to make him understand, but I saw the decision already made in his eyes. This would be ruled a bear attack. Simple, clean, explicable. What about the Wilsons? I asked. What about the man I brought in? We'll send a team out at first light to recover the bodies. And the man? Well, we'll see if he pulls through. Maybe he can tell us more. But the man didn't pull through. He died at 3:17 a.m. at Beckley Memorial Hospital, never regaining consciousness. The doctors cited massive blood loss and trauma. They noted the unusual pattern of his wounds, unlike any bear attack they'd seen. But such details were lost in the broader narrative being constructed. A tragic accident, a rogue bear, a heroic rescue attempt that came too late. The recovery team found the Wilsons' bodies exactly where I said they'd be. What remained of them, anyway. They also found evidence of a large animal. Broken branches, disturbed earth, blood trails, but they found no sign of the creature I described. No carcass, no blood trail leading away from where I'd shot it. Nothing to corroborate my story of a monster with a misshapen head and too many teeth. It was wounded, I argued when they returned. I shot it in the chest. It couldn't have gone far. We followed every trail, Mike, Deputy Graham said, not unkindly. Whatever you shot at, it either wasn't hit or it managed to get away. The news spread through Craven Springs like wildfire. By noon, everyone knew about the Wilsons, about the mysterious hiker, about my wild tale of a monster in Pike Hollow. Some believed me. Most didn't. I couldn't blame them. If someone had told me the same story a day earlier, I'd have laughed them out of town. But I knew what I'd seen, and I couldn't let it go. After the official search was called off, I returned to Pike Hollow alone. I told no one where I was going, what I was looking for. They would have stopped me, concerned for my mental state, my safety. The woods seemed different in daylight, ordinary. The towering pines, the ancient oaks, the undergrowth, all familiar, all harmless. Birds sang, squirrels chattered, insects buzzed. Life continued, undisturbed by the horror that had unfolded beneath these same branches. I retraced my steps, following the now dried blood trails to where the Wilsons had died, to where I had hidden in the brush, to the ravine where I had shot the creature. Here the evidence remained. Broken branches, trampled earth, dark stains on rocks and leaves, and something else, a trail leading away, something heavy dragging itself through the underbrush. I followed it, weapon drawn this time, every sense alert for danger. The trail wound deeper into the hollow, into areas I'd never explored, where the trees grew so dense that noon became twilight. It ended at a cave mouth, a dark slash in a limestone cliff face. The entrance was low, requiring me to stoop, but opened into a larger chamber within. The smell hit me first, that same rot I'd encountered before, but stronger now, concentrated. My flashlight beam played across the cave walls, revealing ancient rock formations, stalactites dripping moisture. And on the floor, drag marks. Something had been brought here, something heavy, but the cave was empty. Whatever had been here was gone. I spent hours searching the surrounding area, looking for additional caves, hidden entrances, any sign of where the creature might have gone. I found nothing but wilderness, untouched and unconcerned with human fears. When I returned to town, covered in dirt and scratches, Sheriff Bowman was waiting at my house. "Where have you been, Mike?" he asked, though his expression said he already knew. "Just clearing my head," I lied. "By going back to Pike Hollow? Alone?" "After what happened?" I didn't answer. Bowman sighed, removing his hat. "Look, Mike, I'm concerned about you. We all are. What you went through, it would shake anyone." "I'm fine," I said automatically. "No, you're not. And that's okay. No one expects you to be. Not after seeing what you saw. I'm just asking you to take some time. Rest. Talk to someone if you need to." "Talk to someone?" I repeated. "You mean a shrink?" "I mean someone who can help you process this. It doesn't have to be a professional, though that couldn't hurt." I laughed, a hollow sound that surprised even me. "And what would I tell them? That I saw a monster in the woods? That no one believes me, even though 2 people are dead and a 3rd died in our hospital? That whatever killed them is still out there?" Bowman's face softened. 2 weeks leave, Mike. Paid. Doctor's orders. It wasn't a suggestion. It was a mandate. I was being taken off duty, deemed unfit to serve, and if I refuse, don't make this harder than it needs to be. Please. I wanted to argue, to rage against the injustice of it all. But exhaustion had settled into my bones, a weariness that no amount of sleep could cure. I nodded, accepting defeat, at least for now. Bowman seemed relieved. "Get some rest, Mike. Things will look clearer in the morning." But they didn't. Not the next morning, or the one after that. Instead, the official narrative solidified. A bear attack, a tragic accident, a town in mourning. The Wilsons were buried, their house put up for sale, their existence slowly erased from the fabric of Craven Springs. The hiker was identified as Gregory Mason, a nature photographer from Pittsburgh. His family claimed his body. His death added to the tally of wilderness accidents that occurred every year in these mountains. And me? I became the town's cautionary tale. Officer Prescott, who'd seen too much, who'd cracked under pressure. They were kind about it, mostly. Sympathetic glances, concerned inquiries about my health. Invitations to dinner or drinks meant to draw me back into the community. But beneath it all, I could sense their fear. Not of the creature I'd described, but of what I represented. The fragility of sanity, the thin veneer of order that separated their comfortable lives from chaos. I spent my 2 weeks' leave in a haze of insomnia and obsession. I researched cryptids, folk monsters, unexplained phenomena in the Appalachians. I compiled accounts of similar attacks across the country. Incidents brushed off as animal encounters or the work of human predators. I found patterns, disappearances in remote areas, bodies discovered with unusual wounds, sightings of creatures that defied classification. All dismissed, all explained away. When my leave ended, I returned to duty, outwardly compliant, inwardly vigilant. I patrolled the streets of Craven Springs with one eye always on the edge of town, on the dark line of trees that marked the beginning of Pike Hollow. Weeks passed, then months. Life in Craven Springs returned to normal. The tragedy faded from daily conversation, replaced by more immediate concerns. The upcoming fall festival, the high school football team's winning streak, the new stoplight at Main and Elm. But I remained changed. I carried the knowledge of what lurked in those woods, what could emerge at any moment to shatter the town's fragile peace. I kept my service weapon with me at all times now, even off duty. I installed new locks on my doors and windows. I avoided the woods after dark, and I waited. For what? I wasn't sure. Another attack? Vindication? Or perhaps for the memory to fade, for doubt to creep in, for me to join the ranks of those who believed the official story. That moment never came. Instead, 6 months after the incident in Pike Hollow, a hiker went missing in the national forest, 20 miles north. Search parties found nothing but a backpack, a broken camera, and blood-soaked earth. 2 weeks later, a family camping near Beckley reported strange noises in the night, described a creature glimpsed in their flashlight beams, tall, gaunt, with too many teeth. And in early December, a hunter was found dead in woods just outside Craven Springs, his body torn apart in a manner that the coroner could only describe as inconsistent with known animal predation. Each incident was explained away. A mountain lion, a bear, human killers, hysteria. But I knew better. It was moving, hunting, and eventually it would return to Pike Hollow, to the cave where it had retreated to heal. I kept my theories to myself this time. I stopped trying to convince others of what I knew to be true. Instead, I prepared. I studied tracking, wilderness survival, firearms. I mapped the cave systems that honeycombed these mountains. I learned everything I could about predator behavior, about how to hunt something that views you as prey, because that's what it is at its core. A predator. And like all predators, it can be tracked, understood, and killed. I'm still here in Craven Springs doing my job. Small town life doesn't change, not really. People still wave when they pass by. Mrs. Hill still gossips at the corner store, and kids still find stupid ways to get themselves into trouble. But me? I don't go near those woods anymore. Not without purpose, not without preparation. I leave that to others, to the innocent and the unknowing, until the day it returns. And I will be waiting. Winter came early to Craven Springs that year, blanketing the town in snow by mid-November. The cold was a blessing, keeping people indoors, away from the woods, away from danger. I'd been keeping a log of incidents, sightings, unusual animal deaths, unexplained noises reported by hikers or hunters. Plotting them on a map revealed a pattern, a slow, circular movement away from Pike Hollow, then gradually back toward it, like something returning home. Sheriff Bowman had stopped questioning my off-duty activities, as long as I showed up for my shifts, kept my opinions to myself, and maintained the appearance of recovery. He was content to look the other way. The town had moved on from the tragedy, from my breakdown. Only I remained fixated, vigilant. On a Tuesday in late January, snow fell in thick, silent flakes, accumulating on streets and rooftops, transforming Craven Springs into a postcard image of small-town winter charm. I was at the diner, nursing a cup of coffee at the counter, when the call came in. "Mike, you copy?" Joanne's voice crackled through my radio. "Got a situation out at the old Reynolds place." The Reynolds property bordered Pike Hollow, an abandoned farmhouse and barn that local kids used for parties and dares. "What kind of situation?" I asked, already reaching for my coat. "Probably nothing. Some kids reported strange noises last night. Figured they were just spooked by the old house, but thought someone should check it out." "I'm on it," I replied, dropping cash on the counter for my coffee. The snow had drifted high against the sides of the road, my cruiser's tires cutting the first tracks of the day as I headed toward the Reynolds place. The sky hung low and gray, promising more snow before nightfall. The farmhouse came into view, a dilapidated two-story structure with sagging porch and broken windows. Behind it, the barn listed dangerously to one side, its red paint long since weathered to a dull pink. Beyond both, the dark line of Pike Hollow's woods loomed, a stark contrast against the pristine white of the snow-covered fields. I parked in what had once been a driveway, now just a slightly less overgrown path leading to the house. The silence was absolute, the snow muffling even the sound of my car door closing. Drawing my weapon, a habit now, not procedure, I approached the house. Footprints in the snow led to and from the porch, multiple sets. The kids Joanne had mentioned, no doubt. But among them was another set, larger and strangely shaped, as if whoever, or whatever, had made them was walking with an unusual gait. The footprints led not to the house, but around it, toward the barn. I followed them, moving quietly despite the crunch of snow beneath my boots. The barn door hung half open, swaying slightly in the gentle wind. The large footprints led inside, but didn't come back out. I paused at the entrance, listening. Nothing but the creak of old wood, the occasional plop of snow falling from the roof. I stepped inside, my eyes adjusting to the dimness. The barn's interior was a cavern of shadows and dust, hay rotting in corners, ancient farm equipment rusting where it had been abandoned decades ago. Sunlight filtered through gaps in the walls and roof, creating bars of light in the darkness. The footprints continued across the dirt floor, leading to a trapdoor that I knew opened onto a root cellar beneath the barn. The trapdoor was ajar, darkness yawning beyond. I should have called for backup, should have waited for daylight, for reinforcements, but I knew that whatever was down there might not wait, and I had waited long enough. Drawing a flashlight with my free hand, I approached the trapdoor. The smell hit me first, that same rotten stench I remembered from the woods, from the cave. I shined my light into the opening, revealing a crude ladder descending into darkness. With a deep breath, I began the climb down, weapon first, flashlight illuminating each rung before I trusted it with my weight. The cellar below was larger than I expected, extending beyond the footprint of the barn above. The walls were packed earth, the ceiling low enough that I had to stoop. My flashlight beam picked out root vegetables long since rotted to mush, empty preserving jars, a rusted shovel leaning against one wall, and footprints in the dirt floor, those same strange tracks leading deeper into the cellar. I followed them, moving slowly, every sense alert for danger. The cellar narrowed into a tunnel, rough-hewn and ancient-looking. This was no root cellar extension. This was something older, something dug for another purpose entirely. The tunnel sloped downward, the air growing colder, damper. Moisture dripped from the ceiling, splashing onto my shoulders. The walls changed from packed earth to natural stone. I was entering a cave system. The realization struck me with certainty. These tunnels connected to the caves in Pike Hollow. The creature had been using them to move undetected, to hunt across a wider range without being seen. I continued forward, deeper into the earth. The tunnel widened into a chamber, then split into multiple passages. I paused, uncertain which way to go. Then I heard it, that same gurgling grunt I'd heard in the woods months ago, echoing from the leftmost passage. My heart hammered in my chest, but my hands remained steady. This was what I had prepared for, what I had been waiting for. I moved toward the sound, weapon raised, flashlight beam cutting through the darkness. The passage opened into a larger chamber, and the smell intensified. Rot and decay and something else, something chemical and sharp. My flashlight revealed the source. The chamber's floor was littered with bones, animal bones, mostly. Deer, raccoon, fox, but among them, unmistakably human remains. A skull, picked clean, a femur snapped in half, ribs scattered like thrown sticks, and in the center of this macabre collection, hunched over a fresh kill, a deer, its entrails steaming in the cold air, was the creature. It looked different in the stark beam of my flashlight. Thinner, its skin pulled tighter over its skeletal frame. The wound in its chest had healed, leaving a puckered scar in the grayish membrane. Its head lifted at my approach, that terrible mouth opening in what might have been surprise. For a moment we regarded each other across the chamber. Predator and prey, though which was which, remained to be seen. "I know what you are," I said, my voice steadier than I felt. "I know you've been hunting in these mountains, killing people, animals. I know you're intelligent enough to hide, to use these tunnels to move around." The creature rose to its full height, bones cracking as it straightened. It tilted its head, regarding me with what seemed like curiosity. "You wounded me," it said. The words hit me like a physical blow. Not because it spoke, though that was shocking enough, but because of the voice itself. It wasn't the growl of a monster or the hiss of an animal. It was a human voice, raspy and disused, but recognizable. Arnold Wilson's voice. What are you?" I managed, fighting the urge to run, to scream. The creature took a shambling step forward. "I am hunger," it said, Arnold's voice distorting around the words. "I am the darkness in these woods. I have always been here." "No." I shook my head, backing up a step. "You're wearing Arnold's voice, like you're wearing—" I couldn't finish the thought. The creature moved closer, its limbs jerking unnaturally. "I take what I need," it said. "Voice, skin, meat. I consume. I become." Understanding dawned, horrible and complete. This thing didn't just kill its victims, it absorbed them somehow, took pieces of them into itself. Was that why it had taken the Wilsons' bodies? Why the wounded hunter had never been found, despite my best efforts? "Stay back," I warned, raising my weapon higher. The creature paused, its head tilting further, nearly upside down now. "You hurt me," it said again, this time in a different voice, younger, female. Beth Wilson's voice. "But I learned. Bullets hurt, but do not kill. Not if I feed soon after." It was toying with me, I realized, showing off its trophies, its stolen voices, creating the maximum terror before it attacked. "Well, two could play that game. I've been tracking you," I said, moving slowly to one side, forcing it to turn to follow me. "Every kill, every sighting. I know your patterns now. Others do too. State police, wildlife rangers, they're on their way here right now." A lie, but a necessary one. I needed to unbalance it, to make it hesitate. The creature's mouth opened wider, revealing those rows of glass-like teeth. Was it smiling? "Lies," it said, this time in the voice of the hunter I'd tried to save. "You are alone. You have always been alone." It lunged, faster than anything its size should move, arms outstretched to grab me. I fired, once, twice, 3 times, the gunshots deafening in the confined space. The bullets hit, punching holes in that gray membrane. But the creature didn't stop. It slammed into me, knocking the gun from my hand, sending me sprawling onto the bone-littered floor. Pain exploded through my shoulder as I landed hard. The creature loomed over me, blood, or whatever passed for it, dripping from its wounds onto my face. Its mouth opened, wider than should be possible, ready to tear into me as it had its other victims, but I wasn't finished. Not yet. My hand closed around something solid on the cave floor, a human femur, long and heavy. I swung it with all my strength, connecting with the side of the creature's misshapen head. It staggered, more surprised than hurt. I scrambled away, searching desperately for my weapon in the darkness. The flashlight had rolled away, casting wild shadows across the chamber as it spun. The creature recovered quickly, turning toward me with renewed fury. It spoke again, this time in a chorus of voices. Arnold, Beth, the hunter, others I didn't recognize. A cacophony of the dead. "You cannot kill me," they said in unison. "I have lived in these mountains since before your kind built towns. I will live here long after you are gone." My hand found my gun, cold metal against my fingertips. I grabbed it, rolled onto my back, and aimed at the approaching monstrosity. "Maybe," I acknowledged. "But you won't live through today." I fired again, emptying my magazine into the creature's chest, where I'd wounded it before. It screamed, that same unholy sound I'd heard in the woods, but didn't fall. Instead, it charged, crossing the distance between us in 2 massive strides. I threw myself sideways, barely avoiding its grasp. My shoulder hit the cave wall, sending fresh pain shooting down my arm. The gun was empty, useless now. I needed another weapon, another plan. The flashlight's beam caught on something metal propped against the far wall, the rusted shovel from the root cellar. The creature had brought it down here, for what purpose I couldn't imagine, but it was solid, sharp-edged, heavy. I lunged for it, my fingers closing around the wooden handle just as the creature grabbed my ankle. It yanked, dragging me backward across the bone-strewn floor. I kicked with my free leg, connecting with its arm, buying myself seconds of freedom. Scrambling to my feet, I hefted the shovel like a baseball bat. The creature rose again, blood flowing freely from its wounds now, its movements slower but no less determined. "You die now," it said, this time in my own voice, a perfect mimicry that sent chills down my spine. "Not today," I answered, and swung the shovel with every ounce of strength I had left. The rusted edge caught the creature across its neck, not a killing blow, but enough to make it stagger back. I pressed the advantage, swinging again and again, driving it backward toward the chamber wall. With each blow, the creature weakened, its regenerative abilities apparently overtaxed by the gunshot wounds. It tried to grab the shovel, but I twisted away, bringing the edge down on its extended arm. The limb broke with a sickening crack, hanging useless at its side. The creature howled, a sound of pure hatred and rage. I didn't let up. I couldn't. This was my one chance to end it, to avenge the Wilsons, the hunter, all the other victims this thing had claimed over who knew how many years. With a final desperate heave, I drove the shovel's edge into the creature's chest, right through the bullet wounds, with enough force that the rusted metal punched through its back, pinning it to the cave wall behind. The creature thrashed, its working arm clawing at the shovel handle, trying to free itself. But the weapon was lodged deep, and with each movement, the wounds in its chest tore wider. I backed away, breath coming in ragged gasps, watching as the thing that had haunted my nightmares for months slowly weakened, its struggles growing feebler, its stolen voices falling silent. Finally, it hung motionless, impaled on the shovel, black fluid pooling beneath it. Dead? I wasn't sure, but incapacitated, at least for now. I needed to make sure it stayed that way. The chamber was lined with rotting vegetation and bones, kindling. My cruiser had road flares in the trunk, and I had matches in my pocket. If bullets couldn't kill it, perhaps fire could. It took 3 trips to gather enough combustible material, pile it around the creature's still form, and retrieve the flares from my car. Each time I returned to the chamber, I half expected to find the creature gone, the shovel discarded on the floor. But it remained pinned, motionless but for the occasional twitch. Dead or dormant, I couldn't tell. When all was ready, I struck a match and touched it to the pile. The flame caught quickly, racing through the dry vegetation, creating a pyre that soon engulfed the creature's body. As the fire grew, the chamber filled with thick, acrid smoke. The creature's skin bubbled and blackened, peeling away to reveal something beneath that wasn't bone or muscle but something else, something I couldn't, and didn't want to, identify. I backed toward the tunnel entrance, watching as the fire consumed what remained of the thing that had terrorized these woods. Only when the heat became unbearable, the smoke too thick to breathe, did I finally turn and make my way back through the tunnels, up the ladder, and into the blessed normality of the winter afternoon. Outside, snow was falling again, heavier now, erasing my tracks, covering the world in clean white. I stood in the farmyard, lungs burning, clothes torn and bloody, and watched as black smoke began to seep from cracks in the barn's foundation. The fire would spread, the barn would burn, perhaps the house too, and with them the entrance to the tunnels, the evidence of what had lived beneath these mountains. Let it burn. Let it all burn. I called it in from my cruiser. Structure fire at the Reynolds place, possible lightning strike, no casualties. By the time the volunteer fire department arrived, the barn was fully engulfed, beyond saving. They focused on keeping the flames from spreading to the surrounding woods, from threatening the town beyond. No one questioned my presence at the scene, my torn uniform, the blood on my hands. In the chaos of the fire, such details were overlooked, forgotten in the more immediate crisis. When the sheriff arrived, he took one look at me and knew. Not the full truth, perhaps, but enough. He nodded once, a silent acknowledgement that some questions were better left unasked. Some stories better left untold. It's over, isn't it? He said quietly, as we watched the barn collapse in on itself, sending sparks spiraling into the darkening sky. Yes, I answered. It's over, and it was. The killings stopped. The sightings ended. Pike Hollow returned to being just another stretch of woods, remarkable only for its quiet beauty, its abundance of game. Spring came, then summer. The Reynolds property was cleared. The charred remains of the barn and house hauled away, the land reclaimed by nature. No one ever discovered the tunnels beneath, now collapsed and sealed by the fire and subsequent demolition. Life in Craven Springs returned to its familiar rhythms. I continued my patrols, waved to Mrs. Hill at the corner store, broke up fights at Rusty's. On the surface, nothing had changed, but I carried the knowledge of what had lived in these mountains, what had hunted these woods. I knew there were things in this world that defied explanation, that existed in the shadows of our understanding. I still don't go near those woods if I can help it. Not because I fear finding that creature again. I'm certain it's gone, reduced to ash in the inferno I created. No, I stay away because some places retain the memory of the horrors they've witnessed, and Pike Hollow has witnessed more than its share. But I'm still here, back in Craven Springs doing my job. Small town life doesn't change, not really. People still wave when they pass by. Mrs. Hill still gossips at the corner store, and kids still find stupid ways to get themselves into trouble. The donut shop still runs out of glazed, sometimes. Bad omen or not, life goes on, and so do I, carrying the secret of what really happened in Pike Hollow, a secret I'll take to my grave, because some stories are better left untold. Some nightmares better left in the darkness where they belong. The sound of my boots crunching on the gravel was the only thing breaking the stillness of the night. I hadn't slept properly in days, maybe weeks. I'd lost track. It was the kind of job that wore you down without you even noticing. Sleep wasn't the problem. The things I'd seen were. Things nobody in their right mind should ever have to face, let alone admit to. My name's Bryce Halford. It's 2004, middle of nowhere, Wyoming, Pine Ridge County to be exact. The kind of place where people disappear and nobody asks questions because nobody's there to hear them. And if there were, well, they wouldn't bother asking anyway. I signed up as a sheriff's deputy 3 years ago, because the big city chewed me up and spat me out. Too much noise, too many people. This place, it was quiet, simple. Cows, fences, and tumbleweeds as far as the eye could see seemed perfect, except when it wasn't. You see, Pine Ridge had its secrets. People would come in asking about a lost hiker or a missing hunter. The official response? They got lost in the woods, or must have had an accident. But I knew better. We all did. The stories were passed around over cheap whiskey, always late at night when nobody wanted to admit they were spooked. Stories of things that moved too fast, too quiet, for any normal animal. Stories of families who'd lived here for generations packing up overnight, leaving behind houses that nobody ever moved into again. Stories of children who'd venture too close to the tree line and come back different, if they came back at all. The worst stories came from the old-timers, the ones who'd been here since before the county was even officially mapped. They'd talk about the scratching sounds that came from inside the earth on certain nights, about shadows that moved independently of their owners, and about the smell that would drift out of Devil's Wood when the wind was just right, a smell like rotting meat mixed with something sweet and cloying that made your stomach turn. I'd heard about the Carlson family who'd lived on the edge of the woods back in '97, found their farmhouse torn apart from the inside, furniture embedded in the walls like it had been thrown by something with inhuman strength. The family was never found, but neighbors reported hearing screaming that lasted for 3 days straight before it suddenly stopped. The house still stood empty, windows boarded up, but sometimes people claimed they could still hear those screams echoing through the walls on quiet nights. Then there was the story of the hunting party that went missing in '01. 5 experienced hunters, all locals who knew these woods like their own backyards. They'd gone in with enough supplies for a week and communication equipment that should have kept them in touch. After 2 weeks of silence, a search party found their camp, tents torn to ribbons, sleeping bags shredded, and blood splattered across the trees in patterns that defied any logical explanation. The blood was fresh, even though they'd been missing for 14 days. The search party also found something else that day, something that made 3 of the volunteers quit the very next morning and move out of Pine Ridge County for good. They found the hunters' rifles, all of them bent into impossible shapes, twisted like pretzels by something with enough strength to treat steel like clay. And carved into every tree trunk in a perfect circle around the destroyed campsite was the same symbol, a series of jagged lines that hurt to look at directly, like they were burned into your retinas. Sheriff Douglas had been in charge back then, and he'd made sure those details never made it into any official reports. But I'd seen the photographs tucked away in his desk drawer, and I'd seen the look in his eyes whenever someone mentioned Devil's Wood. It was the look of a man who'd seen something that fundamentally changed his understanding of what was possible in this world. Now it was my turn to carry that burden. It was my turn on night patrol, when things really went sideways. I was sitting in my cruiser, sipping the worst gas station coffee Wyoming had to offer, when dispatch crackled over the radio. Halford, we got a call from the Jenkins farm. A couple of their livestock went missing. Can you check it out? I sighed and tossed the coffee out the window. The bitter taste lingered in my mouth like a warning. Yeah, sure, heading that way. But even as I said it, something cold settled in my gut. Jenkins had called in livestock problems before, but never at night. Old man Jenkins was the type who handled things himself, had been doing it for 40 years. For him to call us after dark meant something had scared him badly enough to swallow his pride. The Jenkins farm was about 20 minutes out, sitting on the edge of a forest that everyone in town avoided like the plague. No one ever said why, but you could feel it, a weird energy that made the hair on your arms stand up. The locals called it Devil's Wood. Some people said it was cursed. As I drove through the darkness, my headlights cutting through the thick Wyoming night, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching me from the tree line. Every shadow seemed to move independently. Every rustle in the bushes sounded deliberate and calculated. The radio had gone to static about 5 miles out from the farm, which wasn't unusual in this area but still made my skin crawl. I wasn't superstitious, but I wasn't about to make that forest my regular hiking spot either. There were too many stories, too many unexplained incidents, too many people who'd gone missing or come back changed. And tonight, with the moon hidden behind thick clouds and an unnatural silence hanging over the landscape like a burial shroud, every instinct I had was screaming at me to turn around, but I didn't. Couldn't. It was my job. And more than that, Jenkins was counting on me. As I pulled up to the Jenkins place, I could see old man Jenkins waiting by the barn, shotgun slung over his shoulder. Even from a distance, I could tell something was wrong. His usual confident posture was replaced by a nervous energy that made him look older, smaller. His dog, a massive German shepherd named Rex who usually came running whenever a car pulled up, was nowhere to be seen. "Bryce," he greeted me, the lines on his face deep with worry. The porch light cast harsh shadows across his weathered features, making him look like something out of a horror movie. "You're gonna want to see this." His voice was different too, quieter, more subdued. In all the years I'd known Jenkins, I'd never seen him rattled. This was a man who'd faced down mountain lions with nothing but a stick, who'd survived 3 different barn fires and a tornado that had leveled half the county. But tonight, his hands were shaking. He led me to the back of the barn, where 3 cows lay in the grass, each torn to shreds in a way that no wolf or coyote could have done. It wasn't just that they were dead, it was the way they were killed. The rib cages were crushed, like something massive had stepped on them, but there were no tracks. Nothing but claw marks so deep they could have been made by a backhoe. But the claw marks weren't the worst part. The worst part was how precise they were, how deliberate. These weren't the random slashes of a wild animal in a feeding frenzy. These cuts were methodical, almost surgical in their placement. Whatever had done this had taken its time, had enjoyed the process, and then there was the smell. That same sweet, cloying stench the old-timers talked about, mixed with the metallic tang of fresh blood and something else. Something that reminded me of ozone right before a lightning strike, like the air itself had been burned. I crouched down, feeling the cold sweat drip down the back of my neck. The grass around the carcasses was dead, not just trampled, but actually withered and black, as if the very life had been drained out of it. "What the hell happened here, Jenkins?" He spat on the ground, a nervous habit I'd never seen him display before. "I ain't seen nothing, but I heard it. Big, fast, too fast. Took 'em down like they were toys." His voice dropped to a whisper. "But that ain't the worst part, Bryce. The worst part is Rex. My dog went missing same time as the cattle. Found him this morning, or what was left of him. Thing didn't just kill him, it arranged him, laid out his bones in a perfect circle, like some kind of ritual." I felt my blood run cold. Jenkins hadn't mentioned that on the radio. "Where?" "Right at the edge of the woods. And Bryce?" He grabbed my arm, his grip surprisingly strong. Rex's bones were picked clean, but they were still warm. I could feel that familiar churn in my gut, the one that told me I should walk away. But curiosity killed the cat, right? "I'll check it out," I said, standing up. "I'll take a look in the woods." Jenkins shook his head vigorously. "You don't want to do that, boy. Ain't no good comes from going in there. Especially not tonight." "What's special about tonight?" He looked up at the moonless sky, his face pale in the artificial light. "It's the new moon. Things are different on the new moon. Stronger. Hungrier." "I'll be fine," I lied. But as I said it, I noticed something that made my blood freeze. There were footprints in the mud near the barn, not animal tracks but human footprints, except they were wrong. The toes were too long, the heel too narrow, and they were pressed so deep into the earth that whatever made them had to weigh at least 500 pounds. I radioed back to dispatch, letting them know I'd be out of the cruiser for a bit, and headed toward the tree line, flashlight in hand. The radio crackled with static, and for just a moment I could have sworn I heard something that sounded like whispering buried in the white noise. The woods loomed ahead, a black wall of tangled branches and ancient oaks that looked like they'd swallowed the sunlight whole. Every instinct screamed at me to turn around, but I kept walking. A stupid cop trying to prove something to himself, I guess. As I approached the tree line, my flashlight beam seemed to get weaker, as if the darkness was actually absorbing the light. The air grew thicker with each step, and I started to notice that my breath was visible despite the fact that it wasn't particularly cold. The temperature seemed to drop by degrees the closer I got to the woods, until I could feel the chill seeping through my uniform. About 10 minutes in, the air got thick, almost too heavy to breathe. My flashlight cut through the dark, but barely. The beam seemed to bend and twist, creating shadows that moved independently of the objects that should have been casting them. That's when I heard it. Branches snapping somewhere to my left. My hand dropped to my gun, but I kept walking. Could have been a deer, I told myself. Could have been anything. But even as I thought it, I knew it wasn't true. The sound was too rhythmic, too deliberate. It was the sound of something large moving through the underbrush with purpose, but it wasn't. I knew that the moment I saw it. The thing moved between the trees like liquid shadow, a blur of fur and muscle, too fast for my eyes to make sense of. But it wasn't just fast. It was massive, bigger than any bear I'd ever seen, and its limbs moved in a way that made my skin crawl. Like it wasn't put together right, like someone had taken parts from different animals and stitched them together in ways that defied anatomy. Its legs were too long, bending at angles that should have been impossible. Its arms, if you could call them arms, seemed to extend and contract like rubber, reaching distances that physics shouldn't have allowed. And its eyes. God, its eyes were the worst part. They reflected my flashlight beam like a cat's, but they were too intelligent, too aware. There was something almost human in that gaze, something that suggested this thing understood exactly what it was doing and was enjoying every second of it. I stood frozen, my hand still on the gun, but I knew shooting it wouldn't help. How do you kill something that might not even be fully in this world? A loud crash came from behind me, and I spun around, heart pounding in my throat. The trees groaned under the weight of something alive but barely visible. A shape, larger than life, darted between the branches, and before I could even raise my weapon, it was on me. The attack happened so fast that my mind couldn't process it in real time. One moment I was standing, the next I was on the ground with something that felt like a freight train slamming into my chest. I fired blindly into the darkness, praying that I hit something, but the shots just echoed uselessly through the trees. My back slammed against the ground, the wind knocked out of me, and all I could see were these massive claws slashing through the air. They weren't just sharp, they seemed to cut through reality itself, leaving trails of darkness that lingered in the air like tears in the fabric of the world. Pain exploded up my leg, and when I looked down, my right foot was gone, just gone, torn clean off like it was nothing. The wound was cauterized, sealed shut by some impossible heat that had come from those claws. I wasn't bleeding to death, but the agony was beyond anything I'd ever imagined. I screamed. Don't know if it was from the pain or the sheer terror of knowing that this thing, whatever it was real, and I was about to die. But then, just as quickly as it had attacked, it vanished back into the shadows. But before it left completely, it did something that still haunts me to this day. It spoke. Not in words, not in any language I recognized, but directly into my mind. The voice was like grinding glass, like the sound of bones breaking, and it said something that roughly translated to, "You taste of fear. I will remember you." I lay there bleeding out, staring up at the canopy of trees, wondering why I wasn't dead yet. Maybe it didn't finish me off on purpose, or maybe it just didn't care. Either way, I wasn't sticking around to find out. With whatever strength I had left, I crawled toward the sound of the road, praying Jenkins would find me. Every inch felt like an eternity. Blood soaked through my uniform, leaving a trail behind me that felt like a neon sign pointing right at my crippled body. I was leaving a signal for something I couldn't see but knew was watching. The crawl back to civilization took what felt like hours, but was probably only 20 minutes. Every shadow seemed to move. Every rustle in the bushes made me freeze in terror. The pain from my missing foot was constant, a throbbing reminder of how close I'd come to death. Or worse, Jenkins found me about 50 yards from the tree line, unconscious and half dead from shock. Later, he told me he'd known something was wrong when he heard my gun firing, followed by screaming that didn't sound entirely human. He'd grabbed his shotgun and come looking, following my blood trail like breadcrumbs. I woke up in a hospital bed, leg wrapped up in enough gauze to make me look like a mummy. The first thing I saw was Jenkins sitting by the window, his shotgun propped against the wall. The old man looked like he'd aged 10 years in the past few days. "You're lucky," he grumbled, not looking at me. "Damn thing left you alive." I stared at him, trying to process what he just said. My throat was raw from screaming, and when I spoke, my voice sounded like gravel. "What the hell was it?" Jenkins turned to face me, his eyes colder than I'd ever seen them. "It ain't something from this world, Halford. Been here longer than you or me, maybe longer than this land itself. I told you not to go in there." He leaned forward, his voice dropping to a whisper. "My grandfather used to tell stories about it, and his grandfather before him. The native tribes that lived here before we came, they had names for it. Called it the hunger that walks, the shadow between worlds. They built their settlements as far from these woods as possible, and they never, ever hunted here." I didn't say anything. What could I say? I had my leg taken off by something I couldn't even describe, and the more I thought about it, the more ridiculous it all sounded. But it wasn't a joke. No punchline was coming to save me. "The early settlers knew about it too," Jenkins continued. "That's why this whole area was avoided for so long. But eventually, people forgot. They always do. They convince themselves the stories are just superstition, just folklore, until it's too late." The sheriff came by later, a portly man named Douglas who'd been running the department for 20 years. He told me to take my time recovering and that he'd closed the case as an animal attack. I laughed at that one, a dark, bitter laugh that turned into a coughing fit. Animal attack? Sure, that's one way to spin it, but I wasn't in the mood to argue. It didn't matter what they called it. I'd never walk the same way again, and more importantly, I'd never sleep soundly again. Because I knew that thing was still out there, and it remembered me. During my recovery, I started doing research. The hospital had internet access, and I spent hours digging through old newspaper archives, historical records, anything I could find about Pine Ridge County and the surrounding area. What I found made my blood run cold. The disappearances went back further than anyone had told me. Much further. There were records dating back to the 1800s of entire wagon trains vanishing while passing through this area. Native American tribal history spoke of a place where the earth bleeds, and warned against traveling through these woods during certain times of the year. But the most disturbing discovery came when I found a collection of journals in the County Historical Society's digital archives. They belonged to a settler named Thomas McKinnon who'd tried to establish a homestead on the edge of Devil's Wood in 1887. His entries started normal enough, talking about the land, the weather, his plans for crops. But as the weeks went on, the tone changed dramatically. June 15th, 1887. "Something has been watching the house. I see it in the tree line at night, tall and wrong-shaped. The livestock are nervous." June 22nd, 1887. "Found one of the pigs torn apart this morning. The wounds were precise, almost surgical. No wild animal did this." July 4th, 1887. "It spoke to me last night. Not in words, but I understood. It wants something. It's hungry for something more than flesh." July 10th, 1887. "My wife Sarah is acting strange. She stares at the woods for hours and claims she can hear singing coming from the trees. I hear nothing." July 15th, 1887. "Sarah walked into the woods today. I tried to stop her, but she was stronger than she should have been. Her eyes were black, completely black. When I called her name, she turned and smiled, but it wasn't her smile. Too wide, too many teeth." The final entry was dated July 20th, 1887. "It has what it wanted from Sarah. Now it wants me. I can feel it calling, promising things I don't understand. The hunger is spreading. God help whoever finds this journal. Burn the woods. Burn everything." McKinnon's body was never found. The homestead was discovered abandoned. But unlike other cases, this one showed signs of habitation right up until the end. Food was still on the table. Clothes were still in the drawers. But there were scratch marks covering every surface. Walls, furniture, even the ceiling. And in the center of the main room, carved deep into the wooden floor, was that same symbol the search party had found at the hunter's campsite. 2 months passed before I could limp my way back to the Jenkins farm. I had a crutch under my arm and a whole new appreciation for fear. The prosthetic foot the doctors had fitted me with was functional but uncomfortable, a constant reminder of my encounter with something that shouldn't exist. The woods still stood, as ominous as ever, whispering dark secrets I no longer cared to learn. But that wasn't the end. Jenkins told me more cattle had gone missing, and this time, the thing had come closer, right up to the edge of the barn. The claw marks on the doors were deeper than before, and there was something new. Burn marks in the shape of that same twisted symbol. "It's getting bolder," Jenkins said, his voice heavy with resignation. "Hungrier. And it ain't just going after livestock anymore. He told me about the Ramsey family who lived about 10 miles south. Their teenage son David had gone missing 3 nights ago. The search party found his car abandoned on the side of the road with the doors torn off and the steering wheel bent into a pretzel. There was blood, but not enough for a fatal injury, and carved into every tree for a half-mile radius was that symbol. The thing is, Jenkins continued, young David wasn't alone when he disappeared. His girlfriend was with him, Amy Patterson. She came back, but she ain't right. Family says she just sits in her room staring out the window toward the woods, smiling. Won't eat, won't speak, just smiles. And sometimes, late at night, neighbors hear her laughing. But it don't sound like her laugh. I wasn't the only one who knew something was wrong either. The whole town had started whispering, the same way they always had. Except this time, they weren't just whispers. They were warnings. People were packing up, leaving for good. The Peterson family, the Clarks. Even old Harold Morrison, who'd sworn he'd die in Pine Ridge County. All gone within the past month. Main Street was starting to look like a ghost town, with more for sale signs than open businesses. But some people couldn't leave. Some people, like me, felt tied to this place by something stronger than fear. Maybe it was responsibility, maybe it was guilt, or maybe it was something else entirely. Something that thing had planted in us during our encounters. I would have joined the exodus if I could, but I couldn't shake the feeling that running wouldn't help. Something told me it wasn't over. Something told me that whatever it was still out there, watching, planning, and sooner or later, it would come back to finish what it started. That feeling proved prophetic 3 weeks later when Jenkins called me in a panic. It was 3 a.m., and his voice was barely recognizable through the terror. Rice, you need to get out here now. It's back, and it's brought friends. I drove to the farm faster than I'd ever driven in my life, my crutch sliding around on the passenger seat as I took corners too sharp. When I arrived, the scene was worse than anything I'd imagined. The farmhouse was surrounded by shapes, tall, wrong, moving in ways that hurt to watch. They weren't quite in our world, existing in some space between dimensions that made them appear as shifting shadows one moment and solid flesh the next. But they were definitely there, and they were definitely waiting. Jenkins was barricaded inside, his shotgun trained on the front door. Through the windows, I could see the shapes circling the house, getting closer with each pass. And in the center of them all was the thing that had taken my foot. Larger now, more solid, more real. As I watched from my cruiser, trying to decide whether to call for backup or run, the largest creature turned and looked directly at me. Even from 100 yards away, I could feel its gaze boring into my soul. And then it smiled, a horrible too-wide grin filled with teeth like broken glass. It raised one massive claw and pointed at me, then at the woods. The message was clear. It was time to finish what we'd started. I looked at Jenkins' house, at the shapes surrounding it, at the woods that had haunted this county for generations. And I made a decision that would either save Pine Ridge County or damn us all. I got out of the cruiser, leaning heavily on my crutch, and started walking toward the tree line. Behind me, I could hear Jenkins shouting my name, but I didn't turn around. The creatures parted as I approached, forming a corridor that led straight into Devil's Wood. As I entered the darkness for the second time, I could feel the thing's satisfaction radiating through the air like heat. It had been patient, but now it was time to collect what it was owed. The trees closed around me like the bars of a cage, and I knew that this time I wouldn't be coming back. But maybe, just maybe, my sacrifice would be enough to satisfy its hunger. Maybe the people of Pine Ridge County would be safe, or maybe I was just the first course in a feast that would consume everything I'd ever cared about. Either way, I was about to find out. The last thing I heard before the darkness swallowed me completely was the sound of my own footsteps, echoing off trees that had been waiting for me to return. And underneath that, barely audible but definitely there, was the sound of something massive breathing in the shadows, counting down the moments until it could finally claim what it had marked as its own. Not today, though. Today I'm still here, still walking, still hoping that my choices will matter, but deep down, I know the truth. In Devil's Wood, hope is just another word for prey. I took the park ranger job because I wanted to work with my hands, but I never expected to work with hands that aren't attached to bodies. My name is Cole, and 6 months ago, I thought the biggest challenge of working at Richard Bong State Recreation Area would be dealing with drunk campers and the occasional black bear. The 4,515 acres of rolling hills, wetlands, and dense oak forest seemed like paradise compared to my previous job managing inventory at a Milwaukee warehouse. Out here, 30 miles southwest of Racine, I could breathe. I could think. I could forget about the noise and chaos of the city. The Wisconsin Department of Natural Resources hired me in late spring, and by summer I'd settled into a routine that felt almost therapeutic. Morning rounds checking campsites, afternoon maintenance on trails, evening patrols to ensure visitors followed park rules. The work was physical but rewarding, fixing broken fence posts, clearing fallen trees, maintaining the prairie restoration areas. My hands, which had grown soft from years of desk work and warehouse scanning, developed calluses again, real calluses, earned from real work. The other rangers, Beth, a 20-year veteran with graying hair and sharp eyes, and Marcus, a recent forestry graduate with endless enthusiasm, welcomed me without the usual hazing I'd expected. We covered different sectors of the park, communicating through radio when needed, but mostly working independently. It was exactly what I'd wanted: honest work, fresh air, and solitude when I needed it. The first sign that something was wrong came on a Tuesday in late August. I was clearing brush near the northwestern boundary, close to where the parkland bumped up against private farmland, when I found the first hand. It was pale, almost translucent in the dappled sunlight filtering through the canopy. For a moment my brain refused to process what I was seeing. The hand lay palm up beside a rotting log, fingers slightly curled as if reaching for something just out of grasp. No blood, no obvious trauma, just a cleanly severed human hand sitting in a bed of fallen leaves like some macabre piece of art. I dropped my brush cutter and stumbled backward, my heart hammering against my ribs. The hand belonged to a woman. I could tell from the size and the chipped purple nail polish on the fingernails. A thin gold band circled the ring finger. My radio crackled to life before I could reach for it. "Cole, you copy?" Beth's voice, steady as always. "Yeah, Beth, I'm here." My voice came out rougher than I intended. "We've got a missing person report. Female hiker. Didn't return home last night. Family's getting worried. You see anything unusual in your sector?" I stared at the hand, my mouth suddenly dry. Yeah, Beth. You need to get over here. Northwestern boundary, about a quarter-mile from the parking area, and call the sheriff." "What is it?" I closed my eyes, trying to steady my breathing. "Just get over here. And Beth, bring body bags." The next hour passed in a blur of radio calls, crime scene tape, and questions I couldn't answer. Sheriff's deputies arrived first, followed by the county coroner, a thin woman named Dr. Sarah Chen, who approached the scene with professional detachment. Beth and Marcus arrived together, their faces grim as I explained what I'd found. "Jesus, Cole," Marcus whispered, staring at the hand from behind the yellow tape. "You think it's connected to the missing hiker?" Dr. Chen looked up from her preliminary examination. "This has been here longer than overnight. Based on the condition, I'd estimate at least a week, possibly 2. She photographed the hand from multiple angles, her camera flash creating harsh shadows in the underbrush. "The amputation is clean, too clean for an animal attack. This was done with a sharp instrument." "Murder?" one of the deputies asked. "Could be, or post-mortem dismemberment. I'll know more after the autopsy." Dr. Chen carefully bagged the hand, sealing it with red evidence tape. "But this wasn't done here. There's no blood spatter, no signs of struggle. The hand was placed here." That night I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about the woman the hand had belonged to. Where was the rest of her? Who had done this to her? And why leave the hand in my section of the park, where I was almost guaranteed to find it during my regular rounds? I'd moved to the park housing, a small cabin near the visitor center, partly for convenience and partly because the rent was cheap. Now, lying in bed listening to the night sounds of the forest, I questioned that decision. Every snapping twig, every rustle of leaves made me tense. Around 2 a.m., I gave up on sleep and made coffee, sitting at my kitchen table with my service pistol within reach. The missing hiker, Sarah Martinez, was still out there somewhere. And if the hand belonged to another victim, that meant someone was using my park as a dumping ground. But as dawn broke over the tree line, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink, I realized I was thinking about this all wrong. I was assuming human predators, human evil. What I should have been considering was the story every local knew but nobody talked about. The thing Mark Shackleman had seen at St. Coletta Convent back in 1936. The old-timers in Racine still talked about it sometimes, usually after a few beers at Murphy's Tavern. A night watchman making his rounds, seeing something that shouldn't exist, a massive, black-furred creature with long claws and the stench of rotting meat. Most people dismissed it as a tall tale, the kind of story that grows in the telling. But Shackleman had been sober, reliable, not the type to make up stories for attention. And now, 87 years later, hands were appearing in the woods. Clean cuts, deliberate placement, the kind of precision that suggested intelligence, but not human intelligence. As I finished my coffee and prepared for another day of searching for Sarah Martinez, I made a mental note to stop by the Racine County Historical Society. If something had been living in these woods for decades, There might be other reports, other incidents that had been explained away or forgotten. I was a park ranger. I was supposed to protect the visitors, maintain the natural beauty of the area, and ensure everyone went home safely. But increasingly, I was starting to think my real job was something else entirely, something that would require more than the basic first aid and wilderness survival training the DNR had provided, something that would require me to become a hunter. The search for Sarah Martinez began at dawn. Sheriff's deputies, volunteer firefighters, and DNR personnel spread out across the park in a grid pattern, calling her name and checking every ravine, every dense thicket, every place a person might have fallen or taken shelter. I was assigned to lead a team through the same northwestern section where I'd found the hand, an assignment that felt both logical and deeply unsettling. Marcus partnered with me, along with 2 deputies, Johnson, a veteran with a permanent 5 o'clock shadow, and Rodriguez, younger and nervous, who kept checking his radio like he expected bad news at any moment. We moved methodically through the underbrush, following game trails and checking the numerous limestone caves that dotted the area. "How well do you know these woods?" Johnson asked as we paused near a creek bed to examine some disturbed soil. 6 months, I said. Still learning new areas every week. The park's bigger than most people realize. Over 7 square miles of varied terrain. Any dangerous wildlife we should know about? I almost laughed. Black bears, coyotes, the occasional aggressive raccoon. That was the extent of dangerous wildlife according to my training materials. Nothing about 8-foot-tall humanoid creatures with a taste for human flesh. Standard Midwest fauna. Bears, mostly, but they usually avoid people. We found Sarah's backpack around noon. It was hanging from a branch about 12 feet off the ground, caught like a piece of litter in the canopy. The bright red nylon stood out against the green leaves, visible only because we happened to be looking up while navigating around a fallen tree. Rodriguez called it in while Johnson and I figured out how to retrieve it. "That's too high for someone to hang accidentally," Johnson observed as I prepared to climb. Even if she was trying to bear-proof her gear, the backpack was in good condition. No tears, no blood, no obvious signs of struggle. Inside, we found the usual hiking supplies, water bottles, trail mix, a first aid kit, extra socks, and Sarah's wallet. Her driver's license showed a smiling woman in her early 30s with dark hair and kind eyes. A teacher from Milwaukee, according to the emergency contact information the family had provided. "GPS unit still here," Marcus noted, powering on a small handheld device. "Last recorded position was here, yesterday at 3:47 p.m. So she made it this far," Johnson said. "Question is, what happened after she stopped to use the GPS?" I studied the surrounding area more carefully. We were in a natural clearing, maybe 30 yards across, where an old oak had fallen years ago and created a gap in the canopy. The ground was softer here, covered in moss and decomposing leaves, perfect for holding tracks. "Over here," I called, crouching beside a depression in the soil. Footprints. The tracks were clear. Sarah's hiking boots, size 7 or 8, moving from the direction of the main trail toward the center of the clearing. But they stopped abruptly, as if she'd simply vanished mid-step. No scuff marks, suggesting a struggle, no drag marks, nothing to indicate what had happened next. "That's impossible," Rodriguez muttered, staring at the tracks. "People don't just disappear." "But they do," I thought. "Especially when something picks them up and carries them away." Johnson was examining the trees around the clearing's perimeter. "Hey, Cole, you need to see this." He'd found more tracks, but these weren't human. Pressed deep into the soft earth near a massive oak tree were footprints unlike anything I'd seen before. Roughly human-shaped, but enormous, at least 18 inches long and 8 inches wide. The depth of the impressions suggested incredible weight, easily 300 or 400 pounds. "Bear?" Rodriguez asked hopefully. "Wrong shape," I said, kneeling beside the tracks. "And look at these." I pointed to 5 deep gouges in the bark of the oak tree, about 8 feet off the ground. Claw marks, but they're too precise, too deliberate. Bears leave shallower scratches when they mark territory. Johnson was already on his radio, calling for backup and requesting the crime scene team. As we waited, I studied the claw marks more closely. They weren't random scrapes. They formed a pattern, almost like primitive letters or symbols carved into the bark. "What do you think it means?" Marcus asked, following my gaze. "I don't know. But whatever made these tracks, it's intelligent." The crime scene team arrived within an hour, led by Detective Lisa Park, a compact woman with prematurely gray hair and sharp green eyes. She listened to our report without interruption, occasionally making notes in a worn leather notebook. "The hand you found yesterday," she said finally. "How far from here?" "Maybe 300 yards, northwest, closer to the parking area." "And you think these incidents are connected?" I hesitated. The rational part of my mind wanted to say no, to stick to conventional explanations. Human predators, maybe someone with an obsession with amputation. But the tracks, the claw marks, the impossible precision of Sarah's disappearance, none of it fit a human pattern. "I think we're dealing with something unusual," I said carefully. Detective Park raised an eyebrow. "Unusual how?" Before I could answer, her radio crackled with an urgent transmission. "All units, we have another discovery. Human remains located in Sector 7, approximately 1 mile south of your position. Requesting immediate response." Sector 7 was Marcus's usual patrol area, a section of dense forest that bordered a wetland preserve. We arrived to find 2 DNR biologists standing beside a small pond, their faces pale with shock. In the shallow water, partially submerged among the cattails, was a human torso. Like the hand, it had been cleanly severed, no ragged tears or obvious trauma, just precise cuts at the shoulders, waist, and hips. The body belonged to a middle-aged man, based on the build and the remaining clothing. Dr. Chen arrived shortly after we did, wading into the pond in rubber boots to examine the remains. "Same pattern as yesterday," she announced after her preliminary examination. "Clean amputations, no obvious cause of death. This wasn't done here. There's no blood in the water, no disturbance of the sediment. The torso was placed here recently, probably within the last 24 hours. Any ID?" Detective Park asked. "Nothing obvious. I'll check missing person reports once I get back to the lab." As the sun began to set, painting the sky in shades of orange and red, I found myself thinking about the logistics of what we were dealing with. Someone, or something, was systematically dismembering people and distributing the parts across my park. The precision suggested planning, intelligence, even a twisted sense of ceremony. But the tracks, the claw marks, the sheer physical power required to cleanly sever human limbs, that pointed to something beyond human capability. That night, I drove into Racine and visited Murphy's Tavern, a dim bar near the harbor where the older locals gathered to drink and tell stories. I bought a round for a table of retirees and steered the conversation toward local legends, ghost stories, and things that went bump in the night. "You want to know about weird stuff around here?" said Bill Murphy, the tavern owner's father and a lifelong Racine resident. "Talk to my Uncle Frank. He worked maintenance at St. Coletta Convent back in the 30s. Knew Mark Shackleman personal." "What did Shackleman actually see?" I asked. Bill leaned back in his chair, his weathered hands wrapped around a beer bottle. "Something that shouldn't exist. Big as a grizzly bear but walking upright like a man. Black fur, stinking like a corpse pit, with claws that could tear through steel. Frank said Shackleman was never the same after that night. Wouldn't work alone, always looking over his shoulder." "Just that one sighting?" "Hell no. Frank said there were other incidents over the years, but the church hushed them up, didn't want people thinking the place was cursed or haunted. But maintenance crew found things, claw marks on trees, weird tracks after storms. Sometimes," he paused, glancing around the bar, "sometimes they'd find parts of animals arranged in patterns, like something was marking territory." I felt a chill run down my spine. "What kind of patterns?" "Geometric shapes, symbols carved into tree bark." Frank thought it was intelligent, whatever it was. Not just some dumb animal. When I got home that night, I spread out topographical maps of the park and surrounding area on my kitchen table. Using red pins, I marked where we'd found the hand and the torso, then added pins for Sarah's backpack and the strange tracks. A pattern began to emerge. The sites formed a rough triangle, with the northwestern boundary at the apex. If something was indeed marking territory, the triangle encompassed nearly a quarter of the park. And if the 1936 sighting at St. Coletta Convent was related, then this creature had been living in the area for nearly 90 years, growing bolder and more aggressive with each passing decade. I checked my service pistol, a 9mm Glock that suddenly seemed woefully inadequate, and tried to plan for tomorrow's search. Sarah Martinez was still out there, probably alive if the pattern held, but finding her would mean entering the creature's territory, playing by its rules. As I finally drifted off to sleep, I couldn't shake the feeling that tomorrow would change everything, that I was about to discover exactly what it meant to work with hands that aren't attached to bodies. I found Sarah Martinez's legs at dawn. They were arranged carefully at the base of an ancient oak tree, positioned as if she'd been sitting there to rest, the severed edges pressed against the bark to hide the amputation. For a moment, my sleep-deprived brain almost believed she was real, just a hiker taking a break, her torso hidden behind the massive trunk. Then I walked around the tree and saw there was nothing else. My hands shook as I radioed for backup. This was the 4th discovery in 3 days, and the precision was becoming impossible to ignore. Each amputation was surgical in its cleanliness, each placement deliberate. Whatever was doing this possessed not just incredible strength, but also a methodical intelligence that was somehow more terrifying than simple animal brutality. Detective Park arrived with Dr. Chen and a full crime scene team. As they worked, I studied the surrounding area with new eyes, looking for the signs I'd started to recognize. Sure enough, I found them. Massive footprints in the soft earth, claw marks carved deep into nearby trees, and that distinct musky smell that seemed to hang in the air like a warning. "Cole," Detective Park called. "We need to talk." She led me away from the scene, out of earshot of the other investigators. "I've been doing some research since yesterday. Your theory about something unusual. I think you might be right." "What kind of research?" "Old police reports. Missing person cases going back decades. There's a pattern, but it's been dismissed as coincidence or explained away as animal attacks." She consulted her notebook. 1987, hiker disappears near Burlington. Body parts found scattered across 3 counties. 1995, family camping trip goes wrong. Father's remains discovered in pieces near Lake Geneva. 2003, bow hunter vanishes in Kettle Moraine State Forest. Left arm found 2 weeks later hanging from a tree. All in southeastern Wisconsin, within a 50-mile radius of here. And here's the interesting part. In every case, witnesses reported strange sounds in the days leading up to the disappearance. Howling that wasn't quite wolf, footsteps that were too heavy to be human. I thought about the sounds I'd been hearing at night lately. Deep, guttural calls that seemed to echo from the forest depths. I'd assumed they were owls or perhaps coyotes, but now I wasn't so sure. "There's more," Detective Park continued. "I contacted the Racine County Historical Society this morning. They have records of the 1936 incident at St. Coletta Convent, plus dozens of other reported sightings over the years. The church suppressed most of them, but the Historical Society kept copies of witness statements." "What did they say?" "Consistent descriptions. Large bipedal creature, black fur, aggressive territorial behavior. But here's what's really interesting. Several witnesses mentioned intelligence, problem-solving behavior, tool use, even what appeared to be primitive communication." The radio crackled on my belt. "All units, we have a situation. Possible sighting of missing person Sarah Martinez, Sector 9, near the old quarry. Request immediate response." Sector 9 was in the eastern part of the park, a rugged area dominated by an abandoned limestone quarry that had been filled with groundwater decades ago. As we raced through the forest, I couldn't help but notice we were moving deeper into the triangle I'd mapped the night before, closer to what I increasingly believed was the creature's core territory. We found Sarah at the quarry's edge. She was alive but barely conscious, suspended upside down from a makeshift rope harness tied to a sturdy oak branch about 15 feet above the water. Her face was pale and streaked with tears, her hiking clothes torn and dirty. But she was whole, arms, legs, torso all attached and apparently uninjured. "Sarah," I called up to her. "We're here to help. Can you hear me?" Her eyes fluttered open, focusing on us with obvious relief. "Please," she whispered, her voice hoarse from dehydration. "It's coming back. It always comes back at sunset." The rescue took 20 minutes, carefully cutting the rope, lowering her to safety, checking for injuries. Sarah was dehydrated and exhausted, but otherwise unharmed. As EMTs loaded her into an ambulance for transport to the hospital, she grabbed my wrist with surprising strength. "You have to believe me," she said urgently. "It's not human. It's something else, something intelligent. It kept me alive on purpose, like it was studying me." "What did it look like?" 8 feet tall, maybe more. Covered in black fur, but the face was almost human. And the smell. God, the smell. Like something that's been dead for weeks. She shuddered. It spoke to me. Spoke? Not words, but sounds that meant things. It was trying to communicate, trying to understand why I was in its territory. After the ambulance left, I stood at the quarry's edge with Detective Park and Dr. Chen, trying to process what we'd learned. Sarah Martinez was alive because the creature had chosen to keep her alive. The other victims, the dismembered remains we'd been finding, they hadn't been so lucky. "It's escalating," Dr. Chen observed. "The pattern's changing. Before it was just killing and disposing of the bodies. Now it's taking prisoners, conducting some kind of experiments. Or it's getting ready for something," I said. "Sarah mentioned it. Comes back at sunset. Maybe we should..." A sound cut through the forest air, deep and resonant and unlike anything I'd ever heard. It started as a low growl, then rose in pitch to become an almost musical howl that seemed to echo from multiple directions at once. Every bird in the canopy fell silent. The very air seemed to vibrate with the sound's intensity. "What the hell was that?" Detective Park whispered. Before I could answer, we heard it again. Closer this time, coming from the direction of the old-growth forest that formed the heart of the creature's territory. But this time the howl was answered by another call from the opposite direction, then another from the north. There's more than one, I realized, my blood turning to ice water. There's a whole pack of them. The calls continued for several minutes, a complex pattern of sounds that definitely qualified as communication. When they finally stopped, the forest remained unnaturally quiet. No bird songs, no rustling of small animals, nothing but the whisper of wind through the leaves. "We need to get back to the station," Detective Park said. "Regroup, call for backup from the state police." As we hiked back toward the parking area, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were being watched. Several times I caught glimpses of movement in my peripheral vision, large shapes moving parallel to our path, staying just out of clear sight. The musky smell grew stronger as we walked, mixing with another odor that made my stomach turn, the smell of rotting meat. When we reached the parking area, I finally saw one of them clearly. It stood at the edge of the tree line, perhaps 60 yards away, partially hidden behind a massive oak trunk. Even at that distance, its size was intimidating, easily 8 feet tall, with shoulders broader than any human's. The black fur Sarah had described covered its entire body except for the face, which was a disturbing blend of human and ape features. But it was the eyes that made my breath catch in my throat. Intelligent, calculating, and filled with what I could only describe as contempt. We stared at each other for perhaps 10 seconds. Then the creature stepped backward into the shadows and vanished as if it had never been there at all. "Did you see that?" I asked Detective Park. "See what?" I pointed toward the tree line, but there was nothing there now except shadows and forest. Never mind. As we drove away from the park, I glanced back through the rear window. The creature stood in the middle of the access road, watching our retreat with those intelligent, hostile eyes. It made no attempt to hide this time, no effort to maintain the pretense that it didn't exist. The message was clear. "This is my territory. You are not welcome here." But Sarah Martinez was safe, and that had to count for something. Now I just had to figure out how to keep everyone else safe while dealing with a creature that had been perfecting its hunting techniques for nearly 90 years, a creature that was apparently no longer hunting alone. The state police arrived at dawn with tactical gear and enough firepower to level a small building. I watched from my cabin porch as black SUVs and armored vehicles filled the park's main parking area, disgorging teams of officers in full combat gear. Detective Park had convinced her superiors that we were dealing with an armed and extremely dangerous suspect. She just hadn't mentioned that the suspect wasn't human. Lieutenant Marcus Webb, the tactical team leader, was a compact man with graying temples and the kind of steady gaze that comes from 20 years of high-stress operations. He listened to our briefing with professional skepticism, occasionally asking pointed questions about sight lines, terrain features, and potential escape routes. "So you're telling me this suspect has been operating in these woods for decades without being caught?" he asked. "That's correct," Detective Park replied carefully. "We believe he's established a base camp somewhere in the northwestern section of the park, possibly in one of the limestone caves." I admired her diplomacy. Technically, everything she'd said was true. She just hadn't mentioned that the suspect was a 8-foot-tall cryptid with superhuman strength and a pack of similar creatures backing him up. "What about the dismemberment pattern?" Webb continued. "That suggests medical knowledge, surgical tools. The suspect appears to be highly intelligent and well-prepared," I offered. "We're dealing with someone who knows these woods intimately and has had years to perfect his methods." Webb nodded, making notes on a tactical map of the park. "We'll establish a perimeter around the search area and work inward in a standard grid pattern. If this guy is out there, we'll find him." The operation began at 0800 hours. 36 officers spread out across the park in 6-man teams, each equipped with body armor, assault rifles, and enough communication gear to coordinate a small war. I was assigned to Team 3 as a local guide, partnered with 4 state troopers who treated me with the polite condescension reserved for civilian consultants. We entered the creature's territory from the south, moving carefully through dense underbrush toward the area where we'd found the strange tracks and claw markings. The other teams approached from different directions, maintaining radio contact and updating their positions every 10 minutes. At first, everything went according to plan. We covered ground methodically, checking every cave, every dense thicket, every place a human suspect might establish a hideout. The tactical officers were professional and thorough, their movements coordinated and precise. Then we found the shrine. It was located in a natural clearing about 2 miles from the main trail, hidden behind a fallen tree that had created a kind of natural wall. What we saw beyond that barrier changed everything. The clearing was roughly circular, maybe 50 feet across, and dominated by an arrangement of human bones that defied rational explanation. Skulls were mounted on wooden stakes driven into the ground, creating a perimeter around the space. In the center, more bones, femurs, ribs, arm bones, were arranged in complex geometric patterns that hurt to look at directly. "Jesus Christ," whispered Officer Martinez, one of the tactical team members. "What kind of sick bastard does this?" But I was looking at the bones more carefully, and what I saw made my blood run cold. The skulls weren't just human. Some were too large, too elongated, with cranial ridges and jaw structures that didn't match any human anatomy I'd ever seen. Mixed in with the human remains were bones from other creatures, animals I couldn't identify. At the far end of the clearing, carved into the trunk of an ancient oak tree, were symbols unlike anything I'd seen before. They weren't random scratches or primitive cave paintings. They were deliberate, complex, almost like written language. And they were fresh, the bark still oozing sap where deep claws had carved through the wood. "Team 3 to command," the team leader, Sergeant Davidson, spoke into his radio. "We've found what appears to be a ritual site, multiple human remains, possible evidence of cult activity. Requesting crime scene team and backup." The radio crackled with static, then fell silent. "Team 3 to command. Do you copy?" Nothing. Davidson checked his equipment, then tried again. "Any station, this is Team 3. Do you copy?" Silence. "Radio's dead," he announced, his voice tight with tension. "We need to get back to the vehicles, re-establish communication." But as we turned to leave the clearing, we found our path blocked. 3 of them stood at the edge of the tree line, massive forms that seemed to absorb the dappled sunlight filtering through the canopy. They were similar to the creature I'd glimpsed the day before, but subtly different. One was slightly smaller but more muscular, another had lighter-colored fur, and the third bore visible scars across its chest and arms. All 3 watched us with that same calculating intelligence, their posture suggesting coiled violence barely held in check. "Contact," Sergeant Davidson barked, raising his rifle. 3 subjects, armed and dangerous. The tactical officers fell into formation, weapons trained on the creatures, but I could see the confusion in their faces as they tried to process what they were actually looking at. These weren't human suspects, they were something else entirely, something that challenged every assumption about reality. The largest creature stepped forward, and I got my first clear look at the intelligence behind those dark eyes. It studied our weapons with obvious recognition, assessed our formation with tactical understanding, then tilted its head back and released that bone-chilling howl I'd heard the day before. The forest erupted in response. They came from every direction, more of the creatures emerging from behind trees, dropping down from the canopy, rising up from concealed positions in the underbrush. I counted at least 8, possibly more, all of them larger and more intimidating than any human. Their coordination was perfect, their movements suggesting years of pack hunting experience. "Fall back," Davidson shouted, fighting withdrawal to the perimeter. The tactical officers opened fire, their automatic weapons filling the air with thunderous noise and muzzle flashes. I saw bullets strike the creatures, saw dark blood bloom across their fur, but they barely slowed down. Whatever these things were, they were tough enough to absorb multiple gunshot wounds and keep fighting. The largest creature charged straight at Davidson, moving with impossible speed for something so massive. The sergeant got off 3 shots center mass before the thing reached him. Then it was too late. Claws longer than my fingers tore through his body armor like tissue paper, and Davidson's scream cut through the gunfire like a knife. "Run!" I shouted to the remaining officers, but they were already moving, falling back through the forest in a controlled retreat that quickly devolved into panic. Behind us, the creatures howled in triumph, their voices joining in a chorus that seemed to shake the very trees. Officer Martinez stumbled beside me, blood streaming from claw marks across his face. "What are those things?" he gasped. "I don't know," I lied, because the truth would have broken what was left of his sanity. "Just keep moving." We ran through the forest for what felt like hours but was probably only minutes, crashing through underbrush, leaping over fallen logs, following game trails that twisted and turned through the dense woodland. Behind us, the sounds of pursuit grew louder, not just the creatures themselves, but the snapping of branches, the crash of something massive moving through the canopy above our heads. When we finally reached the parking area, we found chaos. Radio equipment lay scattered and destroyed, vehicle windows were shattered, and dark blood stained the asphalt. Of the 36 officers who had entered the park that morning, only 12 had made it back to the rally point. Lieutenant Webb stood beside his command vehicle, trying to raise headquarters on a satellite phone while medics treated wounded officers. His tactical vest was torn and bloody, his professional composure cracked but not broken. "Sir," I approached him carefully, "we need to evacuate the park. Close the roads, get everyone out of the area." He looked at me with haunted eyes. "What the hell are we dealing with out there, Cole?" I glanced around at the wounded officers, the destroyed equipment, the expressions of shock and disbelief on every face. These were trained professionals, people who had faced armed criminals in dangerous situations their entire careers. but they'd never faced anything like this. Something that's been living in these woods a lot longer than we have, I said finally. Something that considers this their territory. Webb nodded slowly, then spoke into his satellite phone. Command, this is Team Leader Webb. We have multiple casualties and are requesting immediate evacuation. Also requesting closure of Richard Bong State Recreation Area under emergency protocols. As sirens wailed in the distance and medical helicopters thundered overhead, I stood at the edge of the forest and watched the tree line for movement. The creatures were still out there, still watching, still waiting. We'd invaded their territory with superior firepower and military tactics, and they'd sent us running like frightened children. But this wasn't over. Sarah Martinez was safe, but there would be other victims, other encounters. The creatures had tasted victory now, and they were no longer content to hide in the shadows. The war for the Wisconsin woods had officially begun. The park remained closed for 3 days while state and federal authorities tried to decide how to handle a situation that officially didn't exist. I spent those days in my cabin, fielding calls from reporters, government officials, and cryptozoology enthusiasts who had somehow learned about the incident despite the information blackout. Detective Park visited on the 3rd day, looking exhausted and frustrated. She sat at my kitchen table with a cup of coffee and a thick folder full of documents. The official report is going to blame everything on a survivalist cult, she announced. Armed extremists living off the grid, possibly using performance-enhancing drugs that increase their size and strength. The physical evidence will be classified, witness statements will be sealed, and everyone involved will be required to sign non-disclosure agreements. And the creatures? What creatures? According to the state of Wisconsin, no such things exist. She opened her folder and spread out photographs, crime scene shots, tactical team footage, medical examiner reports. But I've been digging deeper into the historical records. This isn't the first time something like this has happened. The photographs showed evidence I recognized: massive footprints, claw marks in tree bark, and those disturbing bone arrangements. But Park had also found older records, documents dating back over a century that described similar incidents across the upper Midwest. 1876, logging camp near Hayward reports attacks by creatures of unusual size. 7 dead, camp abandoned. 1923, Iron Mountain mining incident, 3 miners found dismembered in apparent animal attack. 1954, Boy Scout troop encounters large ape-like animals near Wisconsin Dells. 2 scouts never found. They've been here all along, I realized. Multiple generations, probably multiple family groups. And they're smart enough to avoid large-scale contact with humans for over a century. Until now. What changed? Park pulled out a map of southeastern Wisconsin marked with red dots. Population growth, habitat encroachment, climate change affecting their traditional food sources. We've been squeezing them into smaller and smaller territories, and now they're fighting back. So what do we do? Before she could answer, my radio crackled with an emergency transmission. All units, we have a situation at the park boundary. Multiple civilian vehicles, approximately 50 people demanding entry. They're calling themselves Bigfoot hunters, and they're armed. I looked out my window toward the main gate and saw exactly what I'd been dreading. A convoy of pickup trucks, SUVs, and recreational vehicles filled with amateur monster hunters attracted by internet rumors and social media speculation. They carried hunting rifles, crossbows, and enough camera equipment to document whatever they hoped to find. This is going to be a massacre, Park said grimly. The Bigfoot hunters had organized online, drawn by leaked photos and testimony from tactical team members who had violated their NDAs. Their leader was a YouTube personality named Jake Morrison who specialized in paranormal investigations and had over 2 million subscribers. He'd convinced his followers that the government was covering up the discovery of a new species, and that regular citizens had a right to document the truth. I tried to reason with them at the gate, explaining that the park was closed for public safety reasons and that entering would constitute criminal trespass. Morrison live-streamed our conversation to his followers, portraying me as a government stooge trying to suppress evidence of cryptid existence. The people have a right to know, he declared, pointing his phone camera at my face. If there are undiscovered species living in our public lands, that information belongs to humanity. If you go in there, you're going to die, I said bluntly. All of you. Morrison laughed. Trying to scare us with government propaganda? We're not falling for it. They went around the gate after dark, following old logging roads and ATV trails that bypassed the official checkpoint. I watched their headlights disappear into the forest and knew that by morning, most of them would be dead. The first screams started around 11 p.m. I was monitoring emergency frequencies when the panicked radio calls began. Hunters reporting attacks by impossible creatures, vehicles being destroyed, people disappearing into the darkness. Morrison's live stream lasted exactly 17 minutes before cutting off mid-sentence as Something large crashed through his campsite. By dawn, only 6 of the 50 hunters had made it back to the main road. The survivors told stories of coordinated attacks by creatures that moved like ghosts through the forest, picking off stragglers and isolating the group until panic destroyed any chance of organized resistance. The creatures had learned from our tactical assault, adapting their strategies to exploit human weaknesses. Morrison's body was found hanging upside down from a tree near the bone shrine, precisely dismembered and arranged in the same geometric patterns we'd seen before. His camera equipment was destroyed, his live stream deleted from every server, and his social media accounts went mysteriously offline. The media coverage was intense but brief. Within 48 hours, the story had been suppressed, replaced by other news cycles and government disinformation. The official explanation remained armed extremist, and anyone who suggested otherwise was dismissed as a conspiracy theorist. But I knew the truth. The creatures weren't just defending their territory anymore. They were expanding it. Over the following weeks, hikers began disappearing from state parks across southern Wisconsin. The incidents followed the same pattern: clean disappearances, body parts found in remote locations, evidence of intelligent planning and execution. Whatever had lived in Richard Bong's state recreation area was spreading out, establishing new hunting territories throughout the region. I quit my job with the DNR and moved back to Milwaukee, but the nightmares followed me. In my dreams, I walked through forests, filled with bone shrines and geometric patterns carved into ancient trees. I heard the howling calls of creatures that had perfected the art of hunting humans, coordinating their attacks with military precision. 6 months later, I received a call from Detective Park. "They've closed 3 more state parks," she reported. Kettle Moraine, Devil's Lake, and Peninsula. Same story: missing hikers, unexplained evidence, official denials. How many people know the truth? Maybe a dozen law enforcement officials, a few government scientists, some military personnel. Everyone else thinks it's just a series of unrelated incidents, and the creatures, thriving, reproducing, adapting to human tactics and technology with each encounter. She paused. I think they're getting ready for something bigger. Today, as I write this account, the Wisconsin woods are quiet. The state parks remain closed, the hiking trails empty, the campgrounds abandoned. Official sources blame budget cuts and environmental concerns, but those of us who know the truth understand what's really happening. We're losing the war. The creatures that Mark Shackleman first encountered in 1936 have evolved beyond simple predators. They've become something unprecedented in natural history, an intelligent species that views humans as both prey and territorial competitors. They've learned our weaknesses, adapted to our weapons, and developed strategies that turn our own civilization against us. I took the park ranger job because I wanted to work with my hands, but I never expected to work with hands that aren't attached to bodies. Now I understand that those dismembered remains weren't just trophies or territorial markers. They were messages, warnings to stay away from something that has every right to defend its ancestral home. The woods of Wisconsin belong to them now, and increasingly I wonder if they're planning to expand their claim to include the cities as well. Late at night, when the urban sounds of Milwaukee fade to whispers, I sometimes hear echoes of that bone-chilling howl carried on the wind from the forests to the west. It sounds like victory. It sounds like vengeance. It sounds like the beginning of something terrible and inevitable. Something that started with hands in the dark and will end with entire communities learning to fear the creatures that have been watching us from the shadows for over a century. The war for the woods is over. We lost, but the war for everything else is just beginning. An hour after sunset, I found a shredded hiking boot dangling from a cedar branch, its owner's foot still inside, and the snapping sounds below the ridge made my son freeze mid-breath as we realized we weren't alone out there. My name is Lucas Hart, and this happened to me back in 2013 in Ricketts Glen State Park, Pennsylvania. I've replayed those 26 hours in my mind every night since. I wake up sweating, the sheets twisted around my legs like roots, and for an instant I'm convinced the ceiling above me is actually forest canopy, swaying in moonlight. I taste dirt in my mouth, feel the slick of dew on leaves, and hear something breathing just beyond the tree line. Jonah doesn't talk about it anymore. The nightmares lasted 2 years for him. Now he just doesn't sleep much. We started the Falls Trail at first light that morning, just as the mist was rising off Lake Jean. The air smelled of pine sap and wet stone. Ricketts Glen holds 21 named waterfalls in its rocky embrace, and we planned to see them all before sunset. A challenge, but nothing we hadn't done before. Jonah was 14 then, all gangly limbs and boundless energy. He'd been begging for this trip since school let out. I carried the 12-gauge Mossberg the way my dad had taught me. Muzzle down, safety on, round-chambered, because black bear sign shows up in odd corners of this forest, and because habit keeps a man honest. Dad's voice still echoed in my head whenever I checked the action. A gun that ain't loaded might as well be a walking stick, boy. The morning light filtered through the hemlock canopy in slanted gold bars. Water droplets hung from every needle, catching fire in the dawn. Beautiful. Too beautiful to feel the first thread of unease that would later tighten into terror. Think we'll beat our record? Jonah asked, hopping from one moss-covered rock to another, testing his balance. If you don't break an ankle first, I said, but I was smiling. 18 falls in 7 hours. That's the number to beat. We passed the first 3 cascades by 8 a.m. Waters Run Falls, Sheldon Reynolds Falls, Murray Reynolds Falls. Each one had its own voice. Some thundered, others whispered. Jonah insisted we take photos at each one, holding up his phone to capture the spray catching rainbows in the strengthening light. By 10 a.m., we'd hit the halfway point of the loop. The trail grew steeper, narrower. Old-growth forest pressed in. Trees so thick it would take 3 men to circle their trunks with outstretched arms. Roots like arthritic fingers clutched at the path, and the moss grew thicker, swallowing fallen logs whole. Ever wonder what's watching us from in there? Jonah asked, nodding toward the deep woods beyond the trail. He'd always had an imagination that ran wild, spinning ghost stories around campfires that left his cousins checking under their sleeping bags. Probably just squirrels, I said. Maybe a deer if we're lucky, but I felt it too. That sensation of being observed. The forest had gone quiet, I realized. No birdsong, no skittering in the underbrush. Just the constant rush of falling water and our own breathing. By noon, we'd counted 17 waterfalls and shared one stale granola bar. Jonah laughed at my insistence on paper maps, but still asked me to mark each cascade with a crooked arrow. His voice bounced between the rocks, louder than the creek. We were making good time. The sky had clouded over, though, turning the light flat and gray. The temperature dropped, and I zipped my jacket up to my throat. Dad, check this out. Jonah called from around a bend in the trail. That was before we noticed the painted notice tacked to a maple. Missing hikers. Any information? Call park rangers. 3 faces smiled out of rain-smudged ink. The photos showed 2 men and a woman in their 20s, arms slung around each other's shoulders, grinning into the camera. College kids, I guessed. The paper was weathered at the edges, curling away from the staples. The date stamp showed they'd been missing for 6 days. Says they were last seen at Waters Run, Jonah said, tracing his finger over the smudged text. That's way back at the beginning. Probably just got turned around, I said, but my hand went instinctively to the shotgun sling. People wander off trail all the time. All 3 of them? Jonah asked. I didn't have an answer for that. The trail forked ahead of us. Left continued the main falls trail. Right led up an overgrown path that the map marked as an old logging grade. This way, I said, choosing the faint logging grade because it shaved a mile off the loop. We're burning daylight. The path narrowed as we climbed, hemlock branches slapping at our faces. The ground grew spongy underfoot, needles and duff so thick it muffled our footsteps. The silence deepened. No wind, no distant voices of other hikers. Just the soft panting of our breath and the occasional crack of a twig beneath our boots. 5 minutes later, we found a scatter of camera lenses, half-chewed energy packs, and a crushed phone buzzing an alarm no one silenced. I froze, one hand out to stop Jonah. The phone screen was cracked in a spiderweb pattern, but still glowed faintly. 7 a.m. wake up, it read. The date showed 6 days ago. Dad? Jonah's voice had gone small. I knelt, examining the debris without touching it. A high-end camera with the lens separated from the body, as if wrenched apart. 3 energy bar wrappers, the foil torn to ribbons, a water bottle crushed flat, the plastic cracked and spilling droplets into the moss. A backpack strap, severed cleanly at both ends. No blood. That seemed important somehow. Should we call someone? Jonah asked. No service up here, I said, checking my own phone. We'll report it when we get back to the ranger station. I stood, scanning the surrounding forest. The trees seemed to lean in, branches intertwining overhead to block out more light. The path ahead climbed steeply, disappearing around an outcrop of dark stone. Maybe we should go back, Jonah suggested. I almost agreed. But then lightning flickered in the distance, followed by a low rumble of thunder. Storm coming. The shortest way back to the truck was forward, not backward. We'll be fine, I said, resting my hand on the shotgun. Just stay close. Farther on, something had clawed parallel trenches into the loam, as though it were dragging its own weight uphill. The gouges were deep, cutting through roots and rock. Each furrow was as wide as my palm, and whatever made them had been strong enough to displace small boulders in its path. Jonah cracked a joke. Maybe Bigfoot finally learned Instagram, but he kept close, his shoulder brushing my arm with each step. The trail crested a ridge, then began to descend. The trees thinned enough to see the sky again, slate gray now, pregnant with rain. The air had the metallic taste of an approaching storm. I quickened our pace, eager to reach the main trail before the deluge hit, and then the boot turned up, hanging like grisly fruit from a low cedar branch. I saw it before Jonah did. A torn hiking boot, expensive, the kind with red laces and reinforced toe caps. It swung gently in a breeze I couldn't feel, twisting to reveal the horror inside. A human foot, severed raggedly at the ankle, pale flesh mottled with bruising. Fresh arterial spray freckled the needles underneath, tiny rubies catching what little light filtered through the canopy. "Jonah, stop," I said, but it was too late. He'd seen it. Jonah pressed his fist to his mouth, eyes wide. A small, choked sound escaped him. I flicked the safety off on the Mossberg. "We're leaving. Now." The first fat raindrops began to fall as we turned back the way we'd come. They struck the leaves overhead with sounds like footsteps, like something massive moving through the canopy above us. Following, the rain intensified, turning from scattered drops to a steady patter. Water streamed down the trunks of trees and gathered in muddy pools on the trail. The logging grade, never well maintained to begin with, transformed into a slick channel of exposed roots and shifting stones. We retreated toward the main trail, moving as quickly as the treacherous footing would allow. But the slope funneled us sideways instead, the trail bending away from our intended direction with each switchback. I consulted the map, water beating on the laminated surface, and realized we were being directed toward a fire road I didn't remember seeing marked. "Where are we going?" Jonah asked, wiping rain from his eyes. "There's a service road ahead," I said, trying to sound confident. "It'll take us straight back to the parking lot." The lie tasted bitter, but panic would only make things worse. The image of that severed foot burned in my mind. The cut hadn't been clean. No accident with an axe or chainsaw. The ankle had been torn, tendons stretching like wet string before finally separating from bone. We pushed on, the rain now a constant curtain. Dusk pooled fast in the hollows between trees. The gray light that filtered through the clouds and canopy had taken on a sickly greenish tinge, like the moment before a tornado. The temperature dropped further. I could see Jonah's breath pluming in front of his face. A sound reached us then, faint but unmistakable. A wet, sliding noise, like something heavy being dragged over stones. Then silence. Then the sound again, closer this time. "Dad," Jonah started, but I hushed him with a hand on his shoulder. We stood motionless, water dripping from our hoods, listening. Nothing but the patter of rain and the distant grumble of thunder. Then it came again, a scraping, dragging sound, followed by a strange clicking that reminded me of deer hooves on rock, but deeper, heavier. The noise seemed to come from everywhere at once, echoing among the trees. "Move," I whispered, giving Jonah a gentle push forward. We continued down the trail, faster now, slipping on wet stones and catching ourselves on tree trunks. The ground leveled out, and suddenly we broke from the dense forest into a small clearing. Ahead, a padlocked maintenance cabin stood on cinder blocks, one window broken. The structure was weathered gray, the wood warped from years of rain and snow. A metal roof, rusted at the edges, reflected dully in the fading light. I herded Jonah inside, jammed a broom handle across the door, and lit my last road flare. Orange light bloomed, pushing back the shadows and revealing the cabin's Spartan interior. A metal desk with empty drawers, a filing cabinet tipped on its side, a small wood stove, cold and filled with old ashes, and the walls. Orange light showed spattered claw marks on the plywood walls, too high for a bear, too deep for a dog. Some were old, the wood around them darkened with age. Others looked fresher, pale splinters still clinging to the gouges. "What made those?" Jonah whispered, backing toward the center of the room. I shook my head, not wanting to voice the impossible answers forming in my mind. Nothing in these woods should be able to reach 8 feet up a wall. Nothing should have claws that could carve inch-deep furrows in solid wood. A heavy, wet panting passed outside. The sound of something large moving through underbrush, branches snapping beneath its weight. The floor vibrated under each deliberate step. Through the broken window, I caught a glimpse of movement, something tall and dark, passing just at the edge of the flare's light. Jonah whispered, "Dad, it's sniffing us." The thing circled the cabin twice, its breathing changing rhythm, now quick and excited, now slow and measured. Then silence fell, so complete I could hear the blood rushing in my ears. I counted 30 breaths. On 31 it slammed against the far wall. The entire cabin shuddered. Dust rained from the ceiling, boards bowed inward, and for an instant, I thought the whole structure would collapse. Again it struck, this time at the corner where roof met wall. The metal roofing peeled back with a screech like tearing metal. On the third impact, the muzzle punched through the wall, a nightmare silhouette briefly visible against the night sky beyond. Wolf-like head, Wrecked ears, amber eyes alive with violent awareness, shoulders wider than my chest, arms, yes, arms, roped with human muscle yet ending in crooked talons. It forced one arm through the gap, scrabbling for purchase. Wood splintered. A claw the length of my index finger hooked around a board and pulled, widening the breach. I raised the Mossberg and fired point blank. The flare's glare lit a spray of dark, stringy fur and the white flash of exposed bone. The blast staggered it, but it didn't fall. Instead, it withdrew, a low clicking sound rolling in its throat. More insect than mammal. Jonah shoved the fallen filing cabinet against the hole. The cabinet screeched across the floor, and that noise must have enraged the beast. It barreled into the cabin's corner, shearing the siding like tinfoil. Moonlight spilled in, showing its full height, nearly 8 feet, bent digit legs built for pouncing, ribs heaving, saliva slinging from a jaw hinge too far back. The air stank of copper and wet dog fur left too long in the sun. Its chest was matted with something dark and sticky. Old blood, not its own. I racked another shell. The creature's head snapped toward the sound, those amber eyes fixing on me with terrible intelligence. It leapt, covering the distance between us in a single bound, but Jonah pitched the flare. The sudden blossom of light struck its eye. It reeled, clawing its own face. I fired again. This time pellets tore into its thigh. It lurched away, howling high, almost whistling. The sound echoed off the walls, painful in its intensity. I covered one ear with my free hand, eyes watering. The creature backed through the hole it had made, still howling, and disappeared into the darkness. Now, I said, grabbing Jonah's arm. We run. We bolted through the broken wall, into rain that had become a downpour. Outside, the forest felt smaller, every trunk a possible hiding spot. My headlamp's beam jerked from moss to darkness, water droplets catching the light like falling stars. The world had narrowed to a small circle of visibility, surrounded by impenetrable black. I oriented myself using the cabin and the slope of the ground. The truck was 2 miles south, but the quickest line cut through Ganoga Glen. 21 waterfalls in cramped succession, and a series of stone steps slick as grease. In daylight, it would be risky. In this storm, with night falling and that thing hunting us, it was madness, but the alternative was worse. This way, I said, pointing downhill. Watch your footing. We ran, half sliding down the muddy trail. Water coursed around our boots, carrying twigs and leaves in miniature flash floods. The roar of swollen creeks grew louder with each step. In the distance, lightning split the sky, briefly illuminating the forest in stark white light. Behind us, branches snapped, then stopped, then snapped closer. Something large moved parallel to our path, keeping pace without effort. Panic made the trail slide sideways. Jonah's foot shot out from under him, and he toppled forward. I hauled him up by the backpack as something massive crashed onto the path 10 yards away. The beast paced us, using the underbrush like a lane, silent now except for its breathing, which sounded weirdly measured, almost curious. Through gaps in the trees I caught glimpses, a flash of matted fur, the gleam of an eye, a silhouette too tall and too wrong to be any natural creature. The trail widened, joining the main fall's path. Here, stone steps had been set into the hillside, descending in switchbacks toward the sound of rushing water. Ganoga Falls, the tallest in the park at 94 feet. In the rain, its thunder was deafening. A narrow footbridge loomed ahead, spanning a gorge where the creek tumbled between boulders. Water thundered below, white and furious in my headlamp's beam. On the far side, the trail continued upward toward the parking area, but as we approached, the beast bounded ahead, cutting us off. It planted itself in the bridge's mouth, chest rising and falling. The muzzle lifted, tasting our fear. In the harsh light of my headlamp, I could see it clearly for the first time. Its fur was peppered with pellet wounds that oozed dark globs, but it stood straight, balanced on the balls of its hind legs like a man ready to sprint. The face was the worst part, not quite wolf, not quite human, as if someone had tried to mold one into the other and given up halfway. The jaw extended too far, filled with teeth that curved like fishhooks. The nose was a black slash, nostrils flaring as it scented us, and the eyes, God, the eyes, yellow as infection, with vertical pupils that expanded and contracted as it watched. I had 2 shells left. A direct hit center mass might not kill, but there was no time to doubt. I stepped forward and shouted, "Move." It didn't. The eyes locked on mine. For a breath, it felt intelligent enough to weigh options. I could almost see thoughts moving behind those yellow irises. Not animal thoughts, but something colder, more calculating. Then it jerked sideways, vanishing over the rail with one effortless bound, using the boulders beneath us, stepping stones. It moved with impossible grace for something so large, leaping from rock to rock across the churning creek. It's trying to cut us off on the other side, I realized. It wants us on the bridge, Jonah whispered. It's hurting. We can kill it. We backed away. If we couldn't cross, we could flank downstream to the old CCC stairs. That path skirted the tallest waterfall, Ganoga Falls, 94 feet high, slick but wide open. If the beast charged, at least we'd see it coming. Thunder rolled above the trees, distant but rolling closer. Lightning flickered, outlining the ridge. For a second I saw the beast on the far ledge, crouched low, eyes reflecting white like a cat's. It was watching, waiting for us to make a mistake. This way, I said, pulling Jonah toward the alternate path. Stay close to the wall. The CCC stairs, built by the Civilian Conservation Corps in the 1930s, wound down the cliff face beside Ganoga Falls. At normal water levels, the steps stayed relatively dry. But with the storm, water sheeted over each step, turning the stone slick as ice. We climbed anyway, testing each foothold before committing our weight. Halfway up, lightning flashed again, and in its brief illumination, I saw the beast drop onto the landing we just left. Claws scraping stone, head twitching, gauging distance. It began climbing on all fours, powerful haunches slamming the rock. Each impact sent vibrations through the staircase. It moved like something born to hunt, all fluid motion and focused intent. I handed Jonah the shotgun and drew the .357 from my belt. The revolver was a last resort, 5 rounds of hollow point that might slow the creature if it got too close. Aim high, I said. Jonah braced against the rail, the shotgun looking too large in his hands. But his grip was steady, his breathing controlled the way I'd taught him on our trips to the range. I pivoted, fired twice. One round sparked off rock, the other punched into its shoulder. It roared, not guttural but sharp, like metal tearing. Blood as dark as oil spattered the stone. Jonah squeezed the trigger. The 12-gauge boomed, the sound swallowed by thunder. Buckshot hammered into the beast's chest. It slid back, legs pinwheeling, then caught the step with one talon and lunged upward again, slower this time but relentless. Keep moving, I shouted, pushing Jonah ahead of me. Almost there. 3 more steps. 2, 1. We reached the top, emerging onto a slick flagstone viewing platform. To our right, the falls dropped away into darkness, a white curtain vanishing into mist. To our left, the trail continued toward the parking lot. But it required crossing another bridge, and I had no doubt the creature would cut us off there too. Directly ahead, lightning showed a fallen tree balanced across the gorge, a natural bridge, spanning the chasm. The trunk was thick but weathered, stripped of bark by years of exposure. That way, I yelled over the roar of the falls. Across the log, we scrambled onto the fallen tree, arms windmilling for balance. Wind whipped spray into our faces. Below, the falls pounded rock, loud enough to swallow shouts. The log shifted slightly under our weight, small pieces of rotted wood breaking away beneath my boots. Halfway across, I glanced back. The beast had leaped onto the near end of the log. The trunk bowed under its weight. In the intermittent lightning, I could see blood matting its fur, but its movements showed no sign of serious injury. It tested the log with one foot, then another, lips pulled back from those curved teeth in what almost looked like a smile. I reached the far side first, pulling Jonah up onto solid ground. The beast was now moving faster, gaining confidence on the narrow bridge. I handed Jonah the revolver, slung the shotgun, and drew the hatchet from my pack. One good cut at the log's weakest point might drop the whole thing. I hacked, wood chips flying. The beast crept forward, testing each step like a circus cat. Its eyes never left mine, as if it understood exactly what I was trying to do. The final stroke split the trunk's bark, but not enough. The beast dropped onto all fours and charged, covering half the distance in a heartbeat. Jonah fired. The shot grazed its jaw, spinning it sideways, but momentum carried it closer. I swung the hatchet. The blade bit into its forearm, and it yelped, jerked back, slipped. The log rolled beneath it. Gravity decided the rest. It toppled, flailing, claws carving bark ribbons, then plunged into the white roar. I saw a flash of limbs cartwheeling before the spray swallowed it whole. Jonah and I scrambled to solid ground. We lay flat, lungs burning, rain plastering our shirts. Minutes passed. Nothing climbed out of the cauldron below, but as I started to get up, I heard it, faint beneath the waterfall's roar. That strange, insect-like clicking. It was still alive down there, somewhere in the churning pool at the base of the falls. Come on, I said, pulling Jonah to his feet. We need to get to the truck. Now. The rain tapered to a drizzle as we stumbled through the darkened forest. My headlamp caught ghostly shapes in the mist, twisted branches that seemed to reach for us, rocks that resembled crouching figures. Every sound made us flinch, the crack of a distant branch, The hoot of an owl, the rustle of leaves in the dying wind. "You think it's dead?" Jonah asked, his voice small against the vast silence of the woods. I wanted to lie, to offer him comfort. But the image of that thing climbing the stairs with buckshot in its chest told me everything I needed to know about its resilience. "No," I said. "I think we heard it, but it's still out there." The main trail was easier going than the logging grade had been, wide enough for us to walk side by side. Park Service gravel crunched beneath our boots. Normally the sound would be reassuring, evidence of civilization, of safety. Now it felt like an announcement of our position, a dinner bell ringing through the trees. Jonah kept the revolver clutched in his right hand. I'd reloaded the shotgun with my last 2 shells. Both weapons felt pitifully inadequate against the memory of that creature's size and speed. A mile from the parking lot, the trail crossed another creek, swollen now with rainwater, but manageable. A simple wooden bridge spanned the flow. As we stepped onto it, I heard it again, that rhythmic clicking sound, like bone tapping against stone. I froze, grabbing Jonah's arm to stop him. "Listen." The clicking grew louder, more insistent. It seemed to come from beneath the bridge, from the darkness where water rushed between moss-covered boulders. "It's under there," Jonah whispered. I raised the shotgun, aiming at the bridge's edge. "When I say run, you sprint for the other side. Don't look back, don't stop." He nodded, eyes wide in the beam of my headlamp. "Run!" Jonah bolted across the bridge. I backed away slowly, keeping the shotgun trained on the wooden planks. The clicking accelerated, becoming almost frantic. Something large shifted in the shadows beneath. I turned and ran, boots pounding on wood, then dirt. Ahead, Jonah had reached the far side and was looking back, revolver raised. I was halfway across when the bridge heaved beneath me. Wood splintered. Nails shrieked as they pulled free. The entire structure tilted as something massive surged upward from below. I lost my footing, pitched sideways, caught myself on the railing. A clawed hand punched through the planks where I'd been standing a moment before. Talons scrabbled at the opening, widening it. The beast was trying to break through directly beneath me. I scrambled forward on hands and knees as more planks gave way behind me. At the edge of the bridge I lunged, throwing myself onto solid ground as the structure collapsed into the creek with a tremendous crash. The beast howled in frustration, the sound echoing through the trees. I caught a glimpse of it thrashing in the water before Jonah pulled me to my feet. "Go!" I shouted, and we ran. The trail climbed steadily now, switchbacking up the ridge toward the parking area. My lungs burned, my legs felt leaden, but fear gave me energy I didn't know I possessed. Behind us, crashing sounds announced the creature's pursuit. It was no longer trying for stealth, just raw speed. Branches snapped, underbrush tore. That strange, high-pitched howl split the night again and again. "It's gaining," Jonah gasped. I risked a glance back. In the darkness between trees, something large moved with terrible purpose. My headlamp caught a flash of yellow eyes, a glimpse of bloodied fur. The trail took a sharp turn, revealing a steep rock face to our right. An old maintenance ladder was bolted to the stone, leading up to a shortcut trail that would take us directly to the parking lot. "Up there," I said, pointing. "Climb." Jonah reached the ladder first, shoving the revolver into his pocket to free his hands. He scrambled upward, rungs clanging under his weight. I followed, the shotgun awkward across my back. Halfway up, I heard it reach the base of the ladder. Metal groaned as it tested the first rung with its weight. I looked down. The creature stood upright, staring up at us with those terrible eyes. In the harsh beam of my headlamp, I could see the full extent of its injuries, the shredded shoulder where my bullet had struck, the chest matted with blood from Jonah's shotgun blast, the forearm laid open to bone by my hatchet. Any normal animal would be dead. This thing seemed merely inconvenienced. It placed one clawed hand on the ladder, then another. The metal screeched in protest but held. "Faster," I urged Jonah, who was nearly at the top. I climbed frantically, feeling the ladder shudder as the beast began its ascent. The distance between us closed with each passing second. I could hear its breathing now, wet and labored but determined. Jonah reached the top and turned to help me. His face went slack with horror as he looked past me. "Dad!" I felt hot breath on my ankle. Claws scraped against my boot. With a desperate surge, I lunged upward, catching Jonah's outstretched hand. He pulled as I kicked backward. My boot connected with something solid. The creature snarled. Its grip slipped. For an instant, I thought it would fall. Then its other hand caught the ladder with renewed strength. It began climbing again, faster now, driven by rage. I scrambled over the edge just as it reached the top. Jonah was already backing away, the revolver trained on the creature's head. I unslung the shotgun, racked the last E-shell, and fired point blank as its shoulders cleared the ledge. The blast caught it in the face. It reeled backward, losing its grip on the ladder. For a moment it hung suspended by one clawed hand, yellow eyes fixing me with a look of pure hatred. Then the metal gave way with a shriek, and the beast plummeted into darkness, taking a section of the ladder with it. A heavy impact sounded from below, followed by silence. "Is it?" Jonah began. "Don't wait to find out," I said, grabbing his arm. "The truck's this way." We ran through thinning forest, the trees finally giving way to the gravel expanse of the parking lot. My old Ford F-150 stood alone under a flickering security light, the only vehicle remaining this late. I fumbled with the keys, hands shaking so badly I could barely fit them into the lock. Behind us, something crashed through the underbrush at the forest's edge. "Dad!" Jonah's voice rose in panic. The door finally opened. We piled in, and I hit the lock button just as a shadow detached itself from the tree line. The beast emerged into the harsh glare of the security light, moving with a pronounced limp now, but still coming, still hunting. I jammed the key into the ignition. The engine coughed, sputtered, then roared to life. Gravel sprayed as I reversed, then spun the wheel hard, pointing us toward the park exit. The creature charged, covering the distance to the truck with horrifying speed despite its injuries. It slammed into the driver's side door just as I shifted into drive. Metal buckled. The window cracked but held. Yellow eyes glared at me through the glass, inches away. Jaws snapped, leaving Slaver on the window. One clawed hand punched through the side mirror, sending it spinning across the parking lot. I floored the accelerator. The truck leaped forward, throwing the beast off balance. It clung to the door for a moment, then fell away, rolling across the gravel. In the rearview mirror, I saw it rise again, silhouetted against the security light. It stood watching as we sped away, growing smaller with distance but no less terrifying. Neither of us spoke until we'd passed through the park gates and turned onto the main highway. Rain pattered against the windshield. The heater blew warm air that smelled of wet clothes and fierce sweat. "What was that thing?" Jonah finally asked, his voice cracking. I shook my head. "I don't know. I don't think I want to know." But I did know, in some primal part of my brain that recognized predators, that understood what it meant to be prey. That thing had been hunting in these woods for a long time. Those missing hikers were just the latest victims, and we had been lucky. So damn lucky. The dawn smeared pink over the ridge by the time we reached the ranger station. The storm had passed, leaving the world washed clean, as if the horrors of the night had been nothing but a shared nightmare. The station was a low log building with a green metal roof, the state park emblem hanging above the door. Inside, a ranger sat behind the front desk, looking up with mild surprise as we stumbled in. His name tag read Wilson. "You boys are out early," he said, then frowned as he took in our appearance. Clothes torn and muddy, faces scratched, eyes wild with exhaustion and lingering fear. "We need to report something," I said. My voice sounded strange in my ears, too calm for the words I was about to speak. I said nothing about werewolves or monsters. Those words would ensure we weren't taken seriously. Instead, I reported a rabid animal, wounds, missing hikers. I described finding the scattered belongings on the trail, the boot with its grisly contents, the attack at the cabin. Wilson's expression grew increasingly grave as I spoke. He picked up a radio and called for his supervisor. Within minutes, 2 more rangers had joined us, along with a state police officer who happened to be in the area. They took our statements separately. I could hear Jonah in the next room, his voice steady as he recounted the night's events. He'd always been the stronger one, in his way. "You're saying this animal walked on 2 legs?" the officer asked, eyebrow raised in skepticism. "At times," I said carefully. "It moved. Differently. Not like any bear or cougar I've ever seen." The officer exchanged glances with the senior ranger, a gray-haired woman named Beckett. "We'll send a team to investigate," Beckett said, "and to recover the remains you mentioned." "Be careful," I said. "That thing. It's still out there, and it's hurt. Wounded animals are the most dangerous." They found 3 partial remains near the cedar branch, none whole. DNA later matched them to the missing hikers. Official cause of death, animal attack, species undetermined. The case file referenced unusually large paw prints found at the scene, but concluded they were likely from a black bear deformed by injury or birth defect. I knew better. I sold the RV a week later and built a new habit. Every trail, every mile I mark on a map, and I keep the maps filed in my gun safe, along with the Mossberg and a box of shells I pray I'll never need to use. Sometimes, on rainy nights when the wind moves through the trees outside our new house, far from Ricketts Glen, far from any state park, I think I hear that clicking sound. Jonah hears it too. I can tell by the way he tenses, eyes darting to the windows. We don't talk about it. What would we say? That we encountered something impossible? That the natural world we thought we understood harbors nightmares in its darkest corners? The park gates opened at dawn, but every shadow beside the road looked like a doorway taller than a man. Every rustling bush might conceal yellow eyes and hooked teeth. Every strange sound in the night could be that insectile clicking, coming closer. I've never returned to Ricketts Glen, but sometimes I look at maps of the area, tracking reports of missing hikers, of strange animal sightings, of unidentified remains. The pattern moves, spreading outward from the park like ripples in still water. It's hunting still, learning, adapting, and sometimes, when I see a notice about missing hikers in state parks across Pennsylvania, I wonder if there's more than one of them out there. A pack, moving through the ancient forests, watching from ridgelines as human visitors follow well-marked trails, oblivious to the yellow eyes tracking their every move. The park rangers never found the beast's body at the base of Ganaga Falls. They found blood, too much blood for any normal animal to lose and survive. They found fur samples that DNA tests couldn't match to any known species. They found claw marks 8 feet up tree trunks and on rock faces too steep for bears to climb. But they never found the beast. Sometimes I dream I'm back on that trail, alone this time. In the dream, I hear that clicking sound, coming closer with each breath. I turn to run, but my legs move as if through molasses. And then I see it, standing on the path ahead, yellow eyes gleaming with hungry intelligence. In the dream, it speaks. A sound no human throat could make, but with meaning I somehow understand. Found you. I wake gasping, sheets twisted around my legs like roots. For an instant, I'm convinced the ceiling above me is actually forest canopy swaying in moonlight. I taste dirt in my mouth, feel the slick of dew on leaves, and hear something breathing just beyond the bedroom wall. But it's just the house settling, just the wind in the trees, just the lingering terror of a night I can never forget. The Parks Department installed new warning signs at Ricketts Glen the following spring. Black bears frequent this area, they read. Do not hike alone. Do not hike after dark. Simple warnings for a simple danger. Nothing about creatures that walk like men but hunt like wolves. Nothing about yellow eyes watching from ridgelines. Nothing about the clicking sound that means you're already being stalked, because some truths are too terrible to acknowledge. Some predators too nightmarish to name. So we stay silent, Jonah and I. We keep our maps marked and our guns loaded. We avoid forests after dark. And we listen, always listen, for that telltale clicking that means the thing from Ricketts Glen has found us again. Because I know, with bone-deep certainty, that it's still out there, still hunting, still remembering the prey that got away, and one day, it will come for us again.